Amigas y amigos.
Dear friends, welcome to the seminar AI, Ethical AI in a Geopolitical World, organized by the Rafael Campalans Foundation, the Pablo Iglesias Foundation, and the FEPS Foundation. And we'll now pass the floor over to the first Secretary of the Socialist Party of Catalonia, President of the Socialistas Units per Avançar Parliamentary Group, and leader of the opposition in Catalonia, Salvador Illa y Roca.
Bueno, pues muy buenos días y...
Well, good morning and welcome. Welcome to Barcelona and welcome to the Casa Socialista Joan Raventós and to the Ernest Lluch venue to host this Ethical AI in a Geopolitical World seminar. I would like to first thank the Rafael Campalans Foundation, the Pablo Iglesias Foundation, presided or chaired by my dear friend Maria Luisa Carcedo, and the Foundation for European Progressive Studies for this very timely session. AI is something that is a factor in our daily life. It has an impact on what we read, what we buy, who we relate with. It impacts our daily lives. And I wanted to share 5 ideas with you this morning. The first one is the need for having a broad perspective, using the headlights, stopping to collect ourselves, because sometimes we are going up a ladder and we never stop. Well, it is necessary to stop at some point and think, and sessions such as today's are very necessary so that we can think. And this one is a joint session organized by 3 foundations, a joint thinking process that does not need our decision or our statements tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but it still impacts our daily lives now, and we need to conduct reflection process in our political progressive environments. The second aspect I wanted to share with you is that we are going through times of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty around us at the moment. We have these ball with the colors of Ukraine on the screen, presiding the session, European values, deep changes triggered at least in part by the pandemic, and times of uncertainty also regarding digital disruption and everything related to the technology around us that, as I said, impacts our daily lives. And the important thing here is to place citizens at the center. Not businesses, not technology. Citizens should be at the core. And the other day I was at another session with a very relevant politician, a progressive politician from our country with international experience, a very long track record, and in an exercise of simplification, useful simplification the way I see it, he said to me there are 3 types of countries in the world, or we can classify countries in 3 categories. Those with the utmost priority or political focus being businesses, the market in the end. We all know what types of countries would be in that bucket. And then the ones that mainly focus politically on the state. We all know what type of countries we're talking about. And then those that mainly focus their political actions and concerns on their citizens. In terms of technology, citizens should come first. Not the market, not the state. The citizens and their rights come first. And I think that including the word ethics in the title of this seminar is already pointing in a direction that I agree with personally. And the third aspect I wanted to share with you is that we are in the midst of the 4th industrial revolution, and AI plays a key role as a facilitator, an accelerator of this fourth industrial revolution. And so everything that is related to generating prosperity is good, and industrial revolutions help in that. But we shouldn't forget about the new shape of labor relations this brings about, and let's not forget the rights of people, placing people at the center, generating prosperity with value-added jobs, with value-added work. And I would like to also say that I am proud. I'm not saying I support, I'm saying I am proud of the line of work of the Spanish government, Pedro Sánchez's government, in terms of reform of the labor market, defense of workers' rights. Someone said this would do away with prosperity, and none of that happened. On the contrary, in Spain, there have never been so many people working, 20.4 million people with a job as we have at the moment. And the fourth thing that I wanted to share with you is that all of these fields of AI, technological progress, it should have boundaries. And we are in favor of progress, of making headway, not being afraid of knowledge, more and better knowledge, and having technologies that allow us to improve our lives. But all of this should come with boundaries, ethical and equity boundaries. And these should be debated about and set by public bodies, not companies, not businesses, public institutions. And as I said before, the focus of the actions of a certain group of countries is citizens. Public democratic institutions should be the one to set the boundaries, the ethical and equity boundaries to those technologies. And you know that, well, I will later talk briefly about this, but I had the honor of being a minister in the Spanish government, and I followed my friend Ms. Carcero, and I led the Ministry of Health during the pandemic. And during that time, I talked to many people, and I talked to a very relevant doctor, a specialist in cardiology, very well known internationally. He had been working for a long time in the United States. We will not say the name here because I don't want to cause him any trouble. But, well, he was born in Catalonia, and I talked to him often, and we exchanged opinions. And he said to me, all of these fields of AI in healthcare is very important. It helps so much, but it will never, ever replace the doctor-patient relationship. I need to see my patient, and just by seeing my patient, oftentimes I already know what is going on with them. They can send me, I don't know how many amounts of data gathered with phones and smartwatches, and I can see predictions, but I need to see the patient. And he said, half of the cases I see are solved with a conversation because it's anxiety, emotions. Well, there are boundaries. AI helps, but there are boundaries, and I wanted to convey this to you because that conversation made me think. And the last thing I wanted to share with you, I think I must speak about this because we're in Barcelona, in Catalonia, so I should refer to the situation in Catalonia. Catalonia has gone through difficult times in the past few years, and fortunately I think we have all reflected based on what we've experienced during the pandemic, the war, the European values that we are talking about. We are seeing the need to walk together, to work together, to share values. We all express our points of view, but we share values. And in the field of AI, Catalonia has a good body of science, wonderful universities, wonderful researchers, very strong cutting-edge companies, but Catalonia only needs to focus. In Catalonia, we need for institutions to focus on precisely the areas they should focus on. Walking along institutions, universities, the industrial fabric, the world of academia, so that they can all develop their full potential, which is a great potential, and also in collaboration with the rest of Spain and Europe. And this is why I'm also grateful for this seminar being held here today in Barcelona, capital city of Catalonia, because it is a call to Catalan society to focus on aspects that are very relevant, and I humbly believe that Catalonia and Spain have a lot to say in this. And I will stop at that, and I will now very proudly pass the floor over to María Luisa Carcedo. It's an honor. We know each other. We were militants, political militants together, and destiny made it so that I replaced her, or went after her, our Ministry of Health a few weeks before the COVID pandemic. And I must say two things about María Luisa Carcedo, which I think give us a great portrait of her personality, her tenacious and consistent personality, and her deep socialism. When I took office as minister, together with Pablo Iglesias and the Minister for Consumption, Alberto Garzón, and, well, we had to be three of us to take on your competences, and she received a round of applause that was astonishing, given not by journalists or others, no, the staff of the ministry. They wanted to pay tribute to María Luisa, and I remember that day very well, and I remember your contained emotion. And then I managed the pandemic with her team. At the Ministry of Health, in a very quiet manner, she had set up a team that was essential to me in order to try and deal with those very complex months with dignity. So I am very proud to welcome you here as the president of the Pablo Iglesias Foundation and the PSA Federal Ethics and Guarantees Commission, and you have the floor.
Bueno, pues buenos días.
Well, good morning. It is a pleasure, Salvador, and additional pleasure to be here in this room because of its name, Ernest Lluch. He started this road of the prestige of healthcare in our country and the best regarded public service by our citizens, and we have the honor of, years later picking up where he left off. So I would like to start by saying I'm very happy that this topic was chosen, and I would like to thank FEPS and the Rafael Combalans Foundation, and of course our Pablo Iglesias Foundation, for taking on this topic, which is already here, and it brings us into the future to analyze the risks to society and the huge advantages, the possibilities for advancement, the management of information that today, well, when we had those huge encyclopedias, those very heavy encyclopedias where we looked up terms, and I'm always sad when I have to throw away books, and I still have them there, but it was unthinkable back then that today we would just, with a couple of clicks, find any information we wanted. So the progress is undeniable, and the progress for production services is undeniable, but it comes with great risks too. The first one comes from the decision to privatize social media, or the media, after great public investments, of course, in the United States and then in Europe. And this means an obscene concentration of wealth in the hands of some. Many business owners in this sector are the most powerful and the richest people in the world, and then they use that money for things that are offensive if we think of the current situation of poverty and inequality that is taking place in the world. And far from fighting it, they're accelerating differences in unequal conditions. So for any democratic society, this should be a concerning reality, and we should rethink public policies to offset this situation. So I think that the first thing we should think about and reflect upon is this transition into the digital world, both in the productive sectors and daily life, social relations. So how can we have an impact from social democracy so that this does not generate inequalities and so that we do not move forward into an unfair world? I think this is the first reflection. And in an electoral campaign, you cannot talk about this. You have to talk about what impacts people. Just to refer to the reality of what happened in Andalusia. But this is operating, even if we don't see it. It's an invisible hand that it's operating. I said that it impacts our lives, our daily life, our jobs, our social relations, our hobbies, our leisure, our behavior. And there is something else here that should make us think. And it should make us think because even in the labor world, we need to think that these shouldn't cause inequalities, because the way our children are being educated now, that shouldn't pose new inequality risks, meaning that some kids will not get the right training. So all of that pool of young people without specific training, and for whom there won't be that many jobs, well, we need to rethink the education system to prevent the rise of a collective of young people with no opportunities, with no job opportunities. This is another side of things that we should bear in mind. There is another aspect that is already impacting democracy, and which is related to data control, the lack of transparency, the value of information, the value of data, which we simply offer without asking for anything in exchange, and someone is getting rich with our data. So we need to rethink that in democratic societies. And then the world of the control of production and industrial development, and the development of companies and everything related to the productive world. And also what control mechanisms, in our case in the European Union, what regulation mechanisms can we have for a minimum degree of democratic control? So this decision of privatizing networks, well, we need to try and offset that now with laws and measures and standards in order to have a minimum degree of control, transparency, interoperability, and interconnection of all of these initiatives that have come up. And then there is something else that I'm greatly concerned about, and I almost always mention, which is the possibilities to control opinions and the minds of people afforded by all of these technologies. And controlling opinions not only by cherry-picking the information that reaches people via social media and selecting, well, the information that reaches us, but also, if necessary, with the creation of fake news that reach people. This is not neutral. We think, well, yeah, it's neither here nor there, but it leaves an imprint in our brains, and it makes up our opinions and what ballot are you going to pick on election day, coming down to the most pragmatic aspect. But the concept of the model of society that we work for, social justice, planning for the future, for the consequences of climate change, individual rights, So how do we preserve those individual rights? There are many, many aspects that affect us as social democrats and that we need to rethink in order to get it right when we plan for solutions, both from the point of view of political initiatives, proposals, and in the legislation and regulation, to have some degree of control of this immense world that we are facing and that will have such a great impact on daily lives, on society, where society is moving towards as a whole, but also individually. And in labor relations, which is one of the panels that we are going to be holding today. A few days ago, I downloaded one of the FEP's documents analyzing what is going on with the loss of influence of social democracy and those absolute majorities that we used to have and that we still have in Portugal, fortunately, and moving towards relative majorities or a loss as a whole of the backing of citizens. And one of the causes, there was an analysis of a lot of causes, and there were some that had evidence, and there's one for which there is evidence particularly, which is changes in the working classes, changes in relations. Us in Asturias, we always use the example of a mining well where at 6 o'clock in the morning they gathered to go down to the well. 1,500 employees would gather there, and the trade union rep would go there to give them any necessary news. So how do you gather this many people today who are connected by so many aspects such as remuneration, the impact on their families, all of that? How do you get that today? There's very radical changes. Now workers work from home oftentimes, so how can they share their working conditions, the conditions of their families, the prospects of their children? So all of these changes, we have the obligation and the responsibility to analyze them, to place them in our radar and amongst our values, and giving answers that we should give from social democracy. And we cannot steer away from our values, not by 1 inch, and from the society that we want. So I am very happy to be holding this seminar today. I would like to thank Maria for being here. I would like to thank my friend Pepe Montilla for being here. And, of course, our panelists who will be presenting and contributing and who will offer their wisdom so that we can provide answers to all of these questions that I'm posing here. Public policies, to get to public policies and the most effective solutions in our model of society for equality, social justice, and also getting ahead of the risks so that our values, freedom, equality, and social justice can prevail in this new world that we're facing, that we need to rethink so that it becomes a source of progress and not risk in the fields that we were discussing. So I will now pass the floor over to the experts, to the ones who really know what they're talking about here in this field, and we will have a very fruitful morning. I am positive about that. And now I'll pass it over to the next panel.
is an expert. He's a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster, and he's also the editor of the book AI for Everyone. And after explaining, I hope and I expect, a little bit what we mean when we talk about AI, because artificial intelligence is, of course, a very difficult to pin down concept, I also would like to hear if indeed AI is now being developed for everyone, and if not, why not? Pieter, please take it away. I would like to make one quick remark. In the program, there's room for questions and answers, but because Pieter will also join us for the second panel at 11:50, you can put your questions online, and also here in the room you can think of your questions, but we'll take them at the second panel when Pieter will make another appearance. On that note, please, Pieter, go ahead.
Can I see the slides?
Yes, they're on that now.
Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this important event, and apologies I can't do my talk in Spanish or Catalan. I wish I could, but it's above my pay grade, I would say. It's a real honor to be here and to share my ideas about AI with you today, in person and online as well. It's a pleasure to be back in Barcelona, a city I've been a couple of times, and especially also being here in person. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a city that is close to my heart. But let's talk here about AI. So obviously this talk is based on the book AI for Everyone, ? Critical Perspectives, which was published in September last year. And the great thing about the book is that it's published open access by the University of Westminster Press. So you can download your free copy via tinyurl.com/AI for everyone. So this actually means that AI for Everyone ? Is also available and accessible to everyone! ! So why does the title of the book is AI for Everyone ? So we have entered an era of what is called technological determinism or technological solutionism, in which governments and businesses are seeking data-driven change, assuming that AI is now inevitable and is already ubiquitous. How can we deal with technological determinism or solutionism is by asking critical questions about AI. AI is one of the biggest hypes in the world of technological innovation of our times. It is portrayed as the catalyst for growth, which will manifestly transform the economy, the future of work. And I also want us to believe that our welfare is dependent on it. And policymakers are putting their hopes on AI for tackling global challenges such as pandemics and even climate change. And in this context, we are bombarded with slogans such as AI for good, AI for all, sometimes even AI for good and for all. The problem, however, is that there's not so much elaboration on what this for good or for all actually means. And frankly, there's also growing evidence that AI itself is one of the reasons behind intensifying societal problems and harms. For example, growing inequalities, a negative impact on the environment, and the patterns of exploitation in the hidden infrastructure of AI, both in terms of the material resources that are needed for building AI systems, but also for human labor that is needed for training data sets and labeling images and so on and so forth. So in other words, this book asks what it means for AI to be available to everyone and to deliver benefits for everyone. And then secondly, what do I mean with critical perspectives? Whenever we are confronted with a hype, it's super important to untangle what exactly is at stake and who is behind the discourses and myths that are created around this hype. Any critical analysis of technology should always start at questioning who is behind them and to whom or for whom is this offered. I already talked about AI as the solution for all our problems, whereas at the same time, there's also a lot of doom scenarios surrounding AI. For example, large-scale automation leading to technological unemployment and other techno-dystopian perspectives. So for this reason, we need a more nuanced, informed debate about the opportunities but also risks of AI. And this can and must be a serious and informed discussion that goes beyond hyperbole and polarization. So what we need to do is asking critical questions on AI, such as what is AI and what it is not? What types of AI do we need? What visions exist around them and who's behind them? And ultimately, how can we think and talk about AI power and inequalities? But before understanding what type of AI we want, we first need to understand what type of AI we have. So our first talk is to name our terms. So we should not forget that AI is a technology that is around for more than 60 years. It was coined in the 1950s at a series of workshops in New Hampshire and Dartmouth College. And for a concept that has been with us for such a long time, there's little consensus on how to define it. There's actually much more debate than agreement what AI is and what it is not. And the only thing that is generally agreed is that there's no widely accepted definition of AI. Russell and Norvig, they argue that for a computer or a machine to be intelligent, to pass the Turing test, which is often used as a way of understanding and conceptualizing intelligence, it needs to possess the following capabilities. So first of all, natural language processing, which means being able to communicate successfully. Secondly, knowledge representation, being able to store what it knows and what it hears. Thirdly, automated reasoning, being able to use the stored information to answer questions and to draw new conclusions. And then fourth, machine learning, being able to adapt to new circumstances and to detect and extrapolate patterns. It is also helpful to distinguish between what is called strong AI and weak AI. Strong AI, or artificial general intelligence, are computational systems with general cognitive capabilities, which have the future potential to surpass human intellectual capacities. Computer scientists and philosophers that disagree on whether this is at all possible. Some directly reject the scenario, while others think if it's theoretically possible, it's not likely to happen soon. But it creates a lot of hype. I'm not sure if you followed the news. Last week there was this debate about someone working for Google and was saying that AI was becoming sentient, and that's exactly dealing with this discussion about artificial general intelligence. But it might be better to focusing on advancements in what is called weak AI, or artificial narrow intelligence, as this is the type of AI we have already, which is already impacting our everyday on a massive scale. And weak or narrow AI performs specific tasks which would normally require intelligence in a human being. But the important bit to remember here is the specific tasks. So the question remains, can we agree on an operational definition of AI? Sociologist Anthony Elliott, in his book The Culture of AI, he defines it as any computational system that can sense its relevant contexts and react intelligently to data in order to perform highly complex tasks effectively and to achieve specific goals, thereby mimicking intelligent human behaviors. So now we have offered some definition of what AI we're talking about. We can move on to the realities of AI for some versus the ideals of AI for everyone. And this brings us to the question, what type of AI do we want, or what type of AI do we need? In the introduction of the book, I have written that looking at AI policies and AI ethics initiatives is a really helpful way to deal with this question. Because while AI policies reflect the priorities of the stakeholders involved, ethical guidelines project a vision of what type of AI is preferred, what benefits it should deliver, and how we can or should deal with potential risks. And obviously this is part of a normative debate, but we can learn a lot from who is involved in these discussions and how they aim to shape the future of AI. So given the projections about the role of AI in economic development, AI is unsurprisingly really high on the policy agenda. And China and the US are in an intense battle for global AI leadership. And surprisingly, there is actually quite a bit of overlap between the Chinese and the American policy visions on AI. China has formulated strategic goals to become the world leader in AI by 2030. While the American AI initiative, which was launched in 2019 by the Trump administration, is all about a nationalist vision of American leadership in AI. Of course, it remains to be seen what shift will there be in AI policies under the new Biden administration. Analyzing national AI policies does not tell us a lot what type of AI countries want. It rather explains what countries expect AI to do for them. And this is really important. The European Union has done more to develop a vision of what type of AI needs to be pursued and what aspects need to be dealt with. That aims to shift, and this is really a very positive development also for the European Union to find its place in this debate in between the US and China, to shift the debate about AI and its impact on society and its citizens. So the EU has put forward trustworthy AI as the key term, highlighting what type of AI it likes to see developed. So trustworthy AI should be lawful. That means respecting all applicable laws and regulations. It should be ethical, respect ethical principles and values, and it should be robust. So both from a technical perspective, but taking into account also its social environment. These principles at first point seem relatively vague, but the EU has also been formulating specific aims such as human agency and technical robustness and privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal and environmental well-being and accountability. And this is really helpful because it can read as a list of values that we would like to attribute to AI. It's not only governments who are active in putting forward a vision for AI. Companies also have a stake in this debate, so it's instructive to examine how they or leading tech companies talk about what type of AI they want to build. Google, for example, has developed a vision that it's called Advancing AI for Everyone, which can be summed up as applying AI to improve their products and to developing tools to ensure that everyone can access AI, and also using Google products, of course. Google also has an AI for social good project, which is similar to Microsoft's AI for social good program. The latter aims to use AI expertise to solve humanitarian and environmental challenges, such as AI for Earth, health, accessibility, humanitarian action, and cultural heritage. While seemingly well-intended at first glance, these AI programs are carefully designed to support the company's goals of corporate social responsibility. And to my opinion, they are good examples of tech solutionism. More substance can be found in how professional associations propose a vision for what good AI means. Organizations such as IEEE and the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM, have produced codes that propose ethical principles for AI. ACM, for example, talks about AI that needs to contribute to society and to human well-being, while IEEE has come up with principles for what they call ethically aligned design. And general principles here include human rights, well-being, data agency, effectiveness, transparency, accountability, awareness of misuse, and competence. Another interesting initiative in this context is the initiative or the project AI for People, and its ambition is to draft a set of ethical guidelines that aims at facilitating the design of policies favorable to the development of what they call a good AI society. So AI for People proposes 5 core ethical principles. The first one is beneficence, promoting well-being and preserving dignity and sustaining the planet. The second one, non-maleficence, privacy, security and capability caution. The third one is autonomy, the power to decide and whether to decide. The fourth one is justice, promoting prosperity and preserving solidarity. And the fifth one is explicability, enabling the other principles through intelligibility and accountability. And while these first four principles overlap with traditional bioethics principles, the last one is a new enabling principle for AI. AI for People has not only come up with a list of ethical principles, they also offer recommendations and action points that can help policymakers and other stakeholders involved to develop and support AI projects and initiatives that benefit society. The overview of AI policies and AI ethics initiatives helps us to understand the debate about what AI we need and what it should deliver. But an important concept is missing here, and this concept is power. And this really brings us to the crux of the book, and also what I think of critical analysis of AI. So to bring power into the debate, we need to understand 2 points. The first one is the problem of what I call AI ideology, and the second one, the limitations of AI ethics. The overview of national AI policies illustrates that AI is seen as an important instrument for positioning countries in terms of what type of society they aim to develop. And here comes the role of ideology. Ideology is a contested concept in social theory, and it can have different meanings, from a more neutral meaning such as the worldviews and the ideas that exist in a society. But ideology can also be used to manipulate human consciousness. And critical scholars argue that ideology is a typical characteristic of capitalism and class societies, and is being used to serve the material interests of dominant groups in society. As discussions of AI often include visions about its potential to radically alter societies and economies, we need to be alert to and critical towards AI ideology. Berman wrote almost three decades ago that the growing interest in AI in capitalist societies can be understood not only in terms of its practical achievements, but also in the ideological role it plays as a technological paradigm for the continuation and reinvention of capitalism. The technological paradigm is a major component of a project of ideology that helps to maintain the essential structures of the current system and makes coherent and viable alternatives increasingly difficult to envision. AI ideology thus propagates one specific vision of what AI is and what it should do, and discourages alternative visions from materializing. Second, we need to be aware of the limitations of AI ethics. So when it comes to developing AI ethical guidelines, the first question we need to ask is who is involved in this? The issue of diversity and inclusion plays out on multiple levels. Research has indicated that developing AI ethics is concentrated in North America, the European Union, Japan, and a small handful of other countries. The absence or underrepresentation of large global regions illustrates a geopolitical power imbalance. And there are also questions about who exactly is involved in developing these guidelines, and whether the panels of experts who produce ethical guidelines are or are not representative of society. And this undermines the plurality that AI ethics aim for. Another problem of establishing AI ethics is the spread at which technologies are developing. Formulating ethical guidelines takes time, and there's a question whether or not ethics can keep up with the rapid development of technologies. AI ethical guidelines also face the problem of what is called ethics washing. So this refers to the practice of exaggerating a company's interest in promoting beneficial AI systems. See, for example, Google and Microsoft, which I mentioned earlier. But also when ethics is used as a substitute for regulation, meaning that companies highlight how ethically they're acting while simultaneously abandoning their legal obligations. For example, not respecting principles in terms of data protection. And the last challenge, and a really important one, especially for this audience here, is also how we move from AI ethics to concrete policies. Because there's no roadmap for what exactly should be done, no precise course of action to be taken in policy development. It comes down to who has the capacity to influence the actions, beliefs, or behavior of others, or who can influence what type of society we want, and what the role of technology or AI should be in it. And ultimately, this is a question about power and who is in control of making those decisions. So what is missing in AI policies and AI ethics is discussing power. Power is also a contested concept in social theory. In a pragmatic way, it can be defined as the capacity of actors to accomplish things in the world. Sociologist John Thompson distinguishes between coercive, economic, political, and symbolic power. The first three are self-explanatory, but symbolic power refers to meaning-making and influencing by this the actions of others. So AI ideology has raised issues of symbolic power, and in the next slide I'll turn to the economic and political power in the context of AI. And this is really important. When talking about the political and economic power of AI, we need to be aware that AI simultaneously refers to technical approaches, social practices, and industrial infrastructures. The technical approaches are straightforward. They're computational systems that use data for training algorithms. But the other two deserve a bit more clarification. The social practices of AI refer to the classification systems which are developed by humans and which are behind machine learning and deep learning algorithms and models. And political power asks who is involved in developing these classification systems and who decides what they look like. Questions about inclusion and representation are inherently political questions. And AI also refers to industrial infrastructures. The infrastructure does not only entail the possibilities of collecting vast amounts of data, but also the computational power that is needed to develop machine learning and deep learning models. Very few companies have simultaneously the computational power, access to data, and also AI expertise, human resources at their disposal, which means that the economic power of these organizations is crucial for the development of AI and is highly concentrated. So given this, I make the case for a radical democratization of AI or a radical perspective on AI. And a radical perspective to AI means that we need to examine AI through the lens of power. And ultimately, this comes down to the question of how AI is shifting power. And this is about bringing real change for the better and disrupting power dynamics and avoiding unequal power distribution. We could repeat and slightly revise William Gibson's seminal quote from 2003 and say, AI is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Of course, the original quote is, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So the central question then is, how can we redistribute power in AI? So my proposal is, if we want to establish AI that transforms society for the better and enables human emancipation, we need a radical democratization of AI. And this radical democratization is necessary to avoid power inequalities. In other words, to avoid a situation whereby only a few organizations, whether they're from government or from corporate ends, have the economic and political power to decide what type of AI will be developed and what purposes it will serve. So in my chapter in the book, I list 3 key principles, what I see as key of part of a radical perspective on AI. The first principle proposes equal access to AI and the benefits it can offer. So in a decent society, all persons should have broadly equal access to the advantages and the possibilities that are being created by digital technologies such as AI. So this means that we need to make sure that all groups in society can have access to and can use AI. The second principle is centered around democracy and inclusion. In a decent society, all members should have a say about what type of AI is being developed and what services are being offered. The production and implementation of AI must be democratized so that all groups in society are consulted and represented, thereby avoiding exclusion. So the second principle is that AI should represent everyone. And last but not least, the third and last principle states that developments in AI should contribute to the well-being of everyone in society. So the principle is AI should be beneficial to everyone. So this is the end of the presentation. I hope I managed to get you inspired to think critically about AI, and this is hopefully a good gateway to discussing ethical AI in a geopolitical world. Thank you.
I think this was an interesting presentation, Pieter, and I think you raised a lot of points. And I think this is also exactly the two themes that we'll take up in the rest of the conference, in the first panel and the second panel. Because I heard you talk a lot about ethics, ethics codes, ethical principles, which of course are important for the development of the technology of AI. On the other hand, you also mentioned some of the limitations to ethics principles. They're voluntary, they're dominated by corporate interests. So perhaps we should look also a little bit beyond that at the regulation of AI, and this will be discussed in the first panel. You also ended on the importance of democratization of AI. You mentioned that it should be accessible to all, it should represent all, and it should also be beneficial to all. And I think in the second panel, we also look at how to do that. Should this mean public policies also to come in? How can we change the development of AI, which now seems to serve certain particular interests? And so how to do that? These are big questions. We can listen to Pieter again at the second panel at 11:50. For now, I would like to thank you. We'll be back in 1 minute with the second panel on busting myths of AI regulation. Is the EU being left behind? Thank you. We'll be back in 1 minute. Introduce you, so you don't have to introduce yourself, and then we go straight to the questions. So ask like, what's the need for regulation? Welcome back to the first panel of this morning's seminar on AI. Busting the myth of AI regulation. Is the EU being left behind? We just heard from Pieter Verdegem, who explained that it's very important that we come up with ethics principles for AI, but he also expressed some limitations around these voluntary codes. And that brings us, in a way, to the next point of the discussion, which is, okay, if these ethics principles are voluntary, if the corporate interests are so large, should we perhaps, when we talk about the democratization of AI, come up with rules, like to decide democratically together what the limits of this technology should be? And this is something that we'll discuss in this panel, but there's also a lot of myths around this, because, for instance, there's a big debate right now around the geopolitical competition around AI. So some people say, if Europe starts regulating AI, then there's a risk that it's being left behind in this big international geopolitical competition between, for instance, the US, but also, of course, China. Some also say that there's risks of killing or undermining innovation. They say that if Europe or other jurisdictions, for instance, Japan or, for instance, Brazil, start regulating AI before others do so, that there's a risk that companies in Europe or other jurisdictions will be set back and that they will lose out in this race. Now the question in this panel is, are these myths? Is there truth to this? How can we avoid that? What are the benefits of regulation? How do we regulate best? I see you looking. Don't worry, you don't have to just listen to me for the next hour, because we have a set of amazing panelists to discuss and debate these questions. First, we have with us Brando Benifei. He's the member of European Parliament for the Social Democrats representing Italy. He's also, and this is very important, the Co-Rapporteur in the European Parliament for the AI Act. The AI Act is a proposal to legislate AI that the European Commission proposed last year. And so in a way, he's the chief negotiator for the Parliament on how this regulation will look like, and the stakes are huge. Welcome, Brando. Second, we also have with us Helena Malikova. She's a member of the Chief Economist team at the European Commission. And I should specify at the Directorate General for Competition in the European Commission. She also worked on multinationals and their tax planning schemes. And she also co-authored a paper on the supposed narrative around an AI Cold War between the US and China, and what Europe's role in this actually is. We also have with us Karina Lopez here on stage. Welcome. She's the head of the Digital Future Society think tank. She's also an expert on technological innovation, and she worked with a host of international organizations, public authorities, but also social entrepreneurs on how to innovate, but also in a socially sustainable way. I have one quick question to the tech panel. Can we make sure the screen exactly we show everything? Thank you. And last but not least, we have with us Laia Bonet. She's the deputy mayor of Barcelona. At Barcelona, she's responsible, and this is very convenient for us today, for digitalization, the digital transition, mobility, and also international relations. So perfectly placed to discuss international relations, AI, geopolitics. She's also head, or I should say chair, of the Eurocities Digital Forum. And that's a group of cities that work together to see how they can innovate digitally in a sustainable and fair way at the European level, at the urban level, sorry. I have introduced now other panelists. I would make a quick warning. I am Dutch, so I can be rude. I will cut you off if necessary. I hope not. I don't want to confirm stereotypes today. But we have a limited set of time, so I would ask you to make this a conversation and to limit your remarks so that we have time for responses and answers. And perhaps, Laia, would you like to start by explaining a little bit why you think we need AI regulation? So why do we need to go beyond ethics? Why is regulation important? Also because, of course, you have a public role, and also in Barcelona, you have looked into this. Laia, please.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure sharing the floor with Brando, Karina, and Helena. Let me start with a clear statement. AI can be a driver of change in how public administration relates to citizens. With AI, we would be able to imagine proactive administrations, able to anticipate citizens' needs, and a better support to public services. But at the same time, we have also seen how AI can discriminate against communities and populations groups that have historically been discriminated. I'm talking about racialized communities or low-income individuals, among others. We have had two very clear examples of that: the UK A levels in 2020 during the pandemic, and the Netherlands benefits affairs. So regulation is needed to make sure public institutions don't get dehumanized by AI technology, and it is also needed to guarantee that the private sector complies with ethical standards. For all these reasons, Barcelona presented back in May 2021 its own AI municipal strategy aimed at both regulating the use of AI in municipal services and promoting ethical AI standards to be followed by private companies operating in the city. This strategy defines several principles as the following ones: the democratic monitoring of AI by public institutions and citizens, transparency and auditability, meaning that algorithm models and the databases they are applied on follow human rights and public interest criteria. And finally, the establishment of liability regimes for any harm or loss that may arise from the creation and use of AI-based solutions. And at the same time, internationally, through the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, which includes over 50 global cities, we have agreed on similar principles to govern the use of AI by local governments. In conclusion, we need regulation of AI because we don't trust AI systems, and most importantly, we don't trust how we will use it. Not trusting it doesn't mean that we don't see its potential, but that we want to get it right from the beginning, and this making sure that AI and fundamental rights go hand in hand.
All right, thank you very much, Laia. That was a very clear expose on why we need regulation. So I heard that you mentioned transparency, which is important, because right now there's kind of a lot that actually goes wrong in the use of AI at municipal level, at public authority, with public authorities across Europe, across the world. You mentioned the UK example of exams that were being automatically scored in a way that, disadvantaged specific groups, which was a big scandal. I'm Dutch, we had a few huge scandals by using AI to discriminate against migrants, unfairly collect taxes and put pressure on people based on their migration status, based on their race, which is also illegal. So indeed, there's big problems. Perhaps it's good now to also go to Brando, who's of course working at European level on the AI Act. So Brando, you listened to Laia, you listened to the need for regulation. Do you think that the AI Act will address these concerns as it stands now?
Well, it will try to do it. We are trying also to make it more apt to reach this objective through our amendments. We are in the very fierce phase of amending the proposal. We have collected now around 3,000 amendments that we are now starting to negotiate between the political groups. In fact, I'm sorry that I can only be here for this very small remark, trying to give a little contribution to this discussion, because I am now traveling to Brussels also to continue this work. But I really want to thank FEPS for the ongoing work on this, not just for this seminar, together with other partners, the foundation at local level, the Barcelona city, that I have to underline also from my side, as it was said before, has been on the forefront of the work on this topic. I've been myself invited in a conference a few months ago on the role of AI in cities and there in Barcelona, and I think it's very important that we connect European, national and local legislative and executive work to actually see how we can apply rules and make them real to build trust. Trust was mentioned, it's a crucial point, and we are working so that people can trust that public authorities and private actors will not use AI to cause them harm, to abuse of their data, to discriminate. This means to change a lot of things, because often the existing data sets to train AI are strongly biased. So we need to work on a better quality of data sets, a strong alignment with GDPR. We need a strong governance. We are working on that so that there is a concrete redress possibility for those that feel that their rights are not protected in the way AI is deployed. And we are fighting for a stronger human rights impact assessment procedure for the users, especially in the highest risk categories. And also, we are proposing to strengthen the prohibitions of unbearable risks, like predictive policing and some forms, at least, of emotional recognition, knowing that on the workplace today, for example, we see the use of AI to monitor workers and to implement policies that are decided without even the workers knowing that they are the subject of an AI system that is being used in the context of their work. So just to, with these examples, to say on public liberties, on the usage of data, on the workplace, on the usage of AI with children, to give you another example of something we are working on, we want to be sure that in these fields, when we talk about 15 to 20%, realistically, these are the also the counting of the Commission, for this number of AI systems, we have a strong regulation so that we can build trust, and we can also have a larger amount of AI systems that with some transparency requirements, some basic rules, they can be deployed more easily. We need to distinguish, and we need to be rational. We need the ecosystem of AI to be developed strongly, but we need citizens to be sure that we have done everything to put them safe.
Brando, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Of a new technology. Yes.
Brando, can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because I would like to keep this conversational, but I know you don't have a lot of time. Before you leave, what's the big weakness you see right now in the plans? So why do you think this could fail? What is the one thing you have to fight for when we talk about regulation of AI?
It's a good point to ask now, because I do see some risks. I see risks, I have to say, from the negotiations that we will have to do with the Council, because the Parliament, I'm sure, can find some solution to find a common position. There are many points where we see already cohesion in the Parliament, many that I mentioned, but we risk having a very divided and very far apart from us, Council, on a few topics for sure. Surveillance, usage of biometric recognition in public spaces, where interior ministers that are influencing the negotiating teams want more free will, and also the issue of the usage of AI in the workplace, where I'm convinced that we will see strong resistances from the Council to a stronger regulation. But I think, especially looking at my role as a social democrat, I think that protecting individual freedom of people not to be controlled, and so for the freedom of expression, of political organization, also in contexts where we have problems now also inside Europe for this kind of political freedom, rule of law, etc. And the issue of work, well, I think these are obvious priorities for social democrats, and also they are fields where we will need to have a tough fight with the Council, I'm sure. We will need to find compromises, but we cannot accept a low ambition. So we will need time to understand who are our allies, for sure, I hope, all our governments that are more progressive, and we will need to strike a deal. Obviously, I don't hope that we are stuck. I hope that next year we can approve a final regulation, because we need to have this regulation also to work with the rest of the world, to set an example, to set a platform for dialogue. I will be in the US in the next months also for an exchange with US lawmakers, because it's important that, first of all, in a transatlantic perspective, we try to build a common understanding. For example, on how to categorize high-risk AI. So, yeah, these are the points I see of more, of need for more fight. Sorry, I lost one earphone,
but we can still hear you.
But thank you. I just got it back. But I think you can still hear me. Yes. So these are the fields where I see the most complicated fight. Yes.
Okay, that's very clear. So I heard the fact that like we don't really know how this works in AI, how it's being applied in the world of work, how the AI Act will act there, if social partners are involved. And of course, this is happening very quickly, especially in the wake of COVID. There's a lot of systems that surveil people in the workplace. You mentioned individual rights, freedom of expression, political organization. This is a key topic. And perhaps the hottest political topic is surveillance, biometrical surveillance in public places. Brando, I wish you best of luck in the discussions. I know there's been thousands of amendments, so I understand you have to go now and work on those amendments. But we'll continue the discussion here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and see you all soon. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. On that note, Carina, let's go to you, because I understand you have some specific ideas around the AI Act, how we can effectively regulate, and also I understood you have some ideas around like combining regulation with innovation. So, do you see the approach also that Brando just set out? Do you agree with that? Do you see some risks here? What's your take on this?
Working. No, it's working now. Look, it's hard to say. I think the first thing we should understand is that why do we need to regulate? This is about designing the rules of the game. So we're talking about technology that we know that has got a lot of disruptive potential that can change the way you interact, the way you do, the way you monitor, all aspects of global life. But we haven't really worked on what are the rules of the game. And we need to know what are these rules of engagement, especially because we already understand that there is the relationship of power that this technology is going to implement is really unproportional. So I think that's the first point that we have to take into account, that this attempt, and we might not get it right at the first, it's about designing some rules of engagement. So for me, it's really positive what's the effort that the European Commission is doing is a strong message also for the big AI players. Now, the biggest challenge is how do we translate what's happening from the legislative perspective into the execution? And I think that's where we have I don't know how to put it nicely, but probably where we have the biggest challenges, the biggest knowledge gaps. So what does that mean? And we do have the GDPR as an example. That has been a challenge when you translate from the European Commission to national powers, that often, the data protection agencies don't have enough staff, don't have enough resources, don't have enough enforcement power. And when it comes to AI or to data protection, time is key. And one thing that we always mention, we always forget to talk about the cases in Netherlands is, for example, the Siri case had been going on for over a decade. We're talking about families that had their lives completely disruptive. Some of them, it really meant, painful and suffering, very suffering situations. But it took over a decade to act and to stop a system that we know that the Dutch government, and I know you Dutch, is working on a super Siri. Because actually, when you went to court, it was about data protection, proportionality of use of data to the results you were trying to implement. It was not based on discrimination, and and we can talk about in more detail about that. But that's one big challenge we have with AI. All the cases that have been taken to court so far, none of them have been taken to court based on discrimination law. And we know that AI, when it comes to the social implementation, one of the biggest challenges is this discrimination of specific groups, specific collectives, specific situations. So I think...
Carina, can you perhaps give one example of like a case, like a bit in detail, where there was discrimination? So like a public authority used AI and there was a concrete risk for a specific group or something?
Look, we have, at the think tank of Digital Future Society, we have analyzed quite a few cases that focus on how design can, sometimes unwillingly harm certain collectives. I'll give a very specific example because I think it's close to a lot of us, is the algorithms that governments are using to decide who gets what type of support when it comes to unemployment services. We have analyzed the case in Austria and Poland, which are quite well known, but I know that the Catalonian government, for example, also uses similar software. I haven't analyzed it, so I cannot say exactly the same, but in case of the Poland and Austria, so it's a software designed for unemployed people when they go to the job seekers center to get support. And what happens is they get divided into 3 groups. The first group is, but you'll be able to get a job in the next 3 months by yourself. You don't need any support. The second group is, if we give you support and training and evaluate how you're going to get an interview and so on, you'll get a good job, permanent, long-term job in 6 months. So all our resources are going to go to that group, which is group B. And then we have the group C. And the group C is, most likely you're not going to be able to get a long-term job in the next 6 months and for the next 2 years. And what happens, who falls under that group C? So these algorithms, what they were designed with variables that penalized people with irregular work, with short history of work, and so on. And this meant that it was damaging for young people that were entering the workforce. It was damaging for mothers that were working because they had like irregular patterns of work, but also they mostly work in part-time, and it was damaging for migrant groups. You might say, from a social perspective, you might say, oh, but this is a good use of public resources. From an ethical perspective, this is not about use of public resources because you are penalizing probably the people that have already been penalized in so many different ways. And I'm going to finish just making that point. The challenge with the AI and what we keep encountering and the pattern that we keep encountering is always the same collectives that tend to be under the tyranny of the AI when it comes to public services, welfare services, and key service like, working environment. What are the type of jobs that are most under control and under control of automated systems? They are not the high-level professional jobs. They are probably manual jobs. So this is the biggest challenge we have in society and for democracies at the moment, is that we are continuously penalizing the same collectives across the board with the use of AI.
Thank you very much, Carina. That was very clear. So I also feel that when I listen to the first panelists, that there's kind of an agreement that we have to regulate. There's perhaps some disagreement about how exactly to do that, or how to change the law that's on the books into something that's practical reality, which also is a big challenge, of course, when we talk about the General Data Protection Regulation from 2018. That's still, being very hard fought over to actually get it implemented and to make sure that big companies respect citizens' data. And of course now the big challenge is how can we avoid spending now a decade of time to implement AI rules when AI is already being implemented. Let's now go to Helena. Helena, you wrote a little bit about the AI Cold War narrative, and I think this is relevant now as well because when we discuss AI regulation, we also of course have to look at the international context. So can Europe regulate? What will be the effects? And will this, for instance, do you think, hinder innovation? Will it set us back? What are the costs? How do you see this?
Thank you, Justin. I think indeed I would like to share here with you some findings of a work that I've done with co-author Joanna Bryson about the idea of this AI Cold War, right? I think already Pieter Verdegem was referring to political statements to the effect. And I think Salvador Ira said in the beginning that the conversation on AI is moving so fast that we rarely take time to reflect. And so at some point with Joanna Bryson, we were discussing in different political discussion, policy discussions, and we thought, okay, there is all of a sudden this narrative that Europe is pretty much nowhere when it comes to AI capabilities, that would be somehow binarily divided between China and the US, and Europe kind of has to take a side, and Europe has no choice because this is what we see. And we then sat back and said, well, let's check this a little bit, let's fact check this. Because when things are going so fast, narratives that are easy to understand or easy to sell can travel fast. And we just realized that oftentimes a narrative that also was reproduced in Politico, in The Economist, we didn't see much facts behind it. We saw one type of set of facts that was aggregating on the side of the US, the market caps of all the GAFAMs and kind of the other startups, Twitter, Snap. And then on the other side of the spectrum was aggregating basically Korea together with China, like Samsung and Tencent and Alibaba, and saying, okay, these are the two poles. And that picture is really wrong at so many levels. To start with, obviously, Korea and China are not acting in a concerted manner. Not to mention Europe was basically really in the middle, kind of completely dwarfed. The other problem with often like the way that this US hegemony in AI is represented is through this lens of market capitalization of this shiny object. So you have the GAFAMs, and then you have the kind of Snap, Twitter. But wait, like IBM is never talked about, right? They are a big company. Adobe is not talked about. They are a big company in AI. And that brings me to the Europe dimension, which is also was misrepresented and is often misrepresented, which is that AI in Europe is often a B2B AI. It's not this, it's often done by established actors, industrial actors. It's not this shiny new startup, but it doesn't mean that there is no AI in Europe. And so we checked this story rather than on this way of who was in the headlines last week, but we collected companies that are doing AI in the different regions based on their patent filings in specific AI areas. And so, like Philips is doing a lot of AI, Siemens is doing a lot of AI, and guess what? Like L'Oreal is doing AI. And so for us, it was important to restructure this picture of bipolar version of the AI capabilities into something much more closer to fact. And there, of course, the picture came out pretty different. The picture is more complex. And I think that, I think indeed that basically this idea, we did not really go into who is perpetuating this narrative, because that can be a lot of people. But for example, the fact that US has this hyper-capitalization of big tech, right? It's not necessarily something we should be dreaming of, right? I mean, the fact that GAFAMs are dwarfing everybody else is a concentration of market power, rather indication than I think this was already discussed today, than kind of a dream. I mean, AI capabilities, like for example, Facebook when we were reviewing this data for 2019 in our category, Facebook has filed as many patents in this area as Hoffman La Roche. And again, I'm not saying that they have the same potential for cybersecurity applications, but but again, it's not that the big names are necessarily coincide with being very powerful and being very present in AI only. So I think who is benefiting from that narrative of that there is a Cold War in AI? I think we kind of indirectly mentioned the corporations, which of course don't want to necessarily go into that, want to minimize the regulation coming from Europe. There is also, of course, the Biden administration is very keen on reproducing this this narrative and this idea of alliance of democracies. And of course, alliance of democracies makes a lot of sense. I do not want to normalize the use of China of AI. And I think, as has been said, a democracy will always, by construction, have a much more human-centric approach to regulation and to technology. So I think that is absolutely fair to say. What I'm saying, and what is our takeaway, is that Europe, if we want to make a case for strategic autonomy in regulation,
yes,
we probably can. And I think, just to finish on that, basically, I think that Europe, indeed, one of the products that Europe has been always exporting brilliantly is quality digital regulation. And so the GDPR, indeed, I think, did pave the way for ambitious AI regulation.
Okay, thank you, Helena. So I understand from you that the picture is a little bit more diversified. So there are different companies doing AI, perhaps also not always the big names. So we have Hoffmann de Roche, you mentioned, Philips. I'm Dutch, I'm pretty familiar with that, of course. So that's a diversified picture. I have one follow-up question for you, but before I also want to announce to the audience, if you have questions, please raise your hand, and then we'll give you the floor as well to ask your questions already based on discussion. And also people online, you can just post your question in the Zoom, in the YouTube comments, and then we'll take them up afterwards. But for now, quick follow-up, Helena. Of course, you also work for the European Commission. I mean, you mentioned the Brussels effect, and that's kind of the idea that Europe can regulate for Europe, but because it's such a big market, essentially all global companies have to comply with those rules, so they change their business models, and in that way, EU is kind of regulating for the globe. But then, on the other hand, Carina mentioned, for instance, that we think this is a huge success. We've seen it with GDPR, with the General Data Protection Regulation 2018, but there's some limits also because we lack the enforcement power, and we lack kind of like the institutional dimension, right? Like we create rules, so for instance, we can say, we need ethical AI, we need explainable AI, but who's going to make that happen? Like who is going to follow up on it? Who's going to check that? I know this is perhaps a little bit of a tricky question, but do you have a view on that? Like, can you address those concerns, or do you have an idea on that, Helena?
I can give some idea. I can give some elements, I think, because I did spend many years now doing enforcement, and so I have some experience about what didn't seem to work. Complex rules that are not clear at all, that are to be interpreted by consultants, don't work. So I think when I heard Laia talking about transparency and auditability, that was really great, because I think, especially in areas that are very complex, the civil society having the data to kind of also parallel run certain, certain tests together with the regulator is basically accompanying the effort. I have experienced that, for example, doing the tax cases, all the involvement of the civil society doing a great job because data had finally become public. And I think then it's about incentives, right? I mean, I'm an economist, so it's about aligning the incentives. And there, I think an interesting element that is not often discussed and is for the moment excluded from the AI Act is liability. And I think it's maybe not a sexy word, but it really comes down to liability. So don't give them a free pass on liability. They'll make it happen if the companies are at risk of fines, if they're at risk of infringing rules, they will put in place, let's not put all the burden of on the regulator. Let's put in place a structure that ensures that everybody has incentives to enforce and to basically comply. That would be my 2 cents.
All right, thank you very much, Helena. So we would say, okay, yeah, regulation is important. I mean, the enforcement of regulation is important. We can't put all our trust, or like not all the burdens, let's say, on regulators. Of course, we can trust regulators to a certain extent, but we also need to have other incentives, for instance, liability. So companies, they come up with unsafe AI, put it in the market, something goes wrong, they have to pay. That can go via the courts, for instance. Okay, I think that's a very good point. Perhaps, Laia, do you have views on this as well? Like we talk about the regulation, the consequences, enforcement. Of course, you work for the city of Barcelona, kind of a big municipality. Of course, you have also enforcement capacity. How do you look at the AI Act? Are you confident that this can be enforced, for instance? Like, what are your views on this?
Let me just make a step back. As you said, since last year, Barcelona chairs the group of European cities working on digital policy, the Eurocities Digital Forum, and in this context, we have been advocating for an ambitious regulation at the EU level. Just one general observation on how AI is being regulated. The focus is mostly set on technology development, on AI systems themselves, rather than on the uses they are given by public institutions and private companies. And this approach misses one fundamental point. What is dangerous about AI is not so much whether intelligent systems comply with some technical requirement. What matters is what is done with these technologies. Let me put an example. We know from the work from Virginia Eubanks that AI is replacing human decisions in the management of social services in North American cities. Mm-hmm. In Barcelona, we do have an AI system that offers social service resources based on what has worked in similar situations in the past. However, in our case, the AI system is used as a support for the social worker dealing with people seeking assistance. But it's the social worker who makes the final decisions rather than being replaced. The technologies behind these two cases are probably not so different, but the important thing is what is done with them. At the EU level, there are also other things that are relevant from cities' perspective, and that had been mentioned in this panel. The first one, the full ban on biometric identification and recognition, which we understand has a majority of MIPs in favor.
That's correct.
And secondly, the inclusion of local governments in the AI work. It is key that we can take part in its ongoing work to provide perspectives on what is happening from the ground. One last issue concerning AI regulations is who monitors its compliance. At the EU level, for instance, the initial proposal of the Commission was that AI providers themselves were the ones responsible for making sure that they comply with technical and ethical standards included in the regulation. To us, this isn't good enough. We need to invest in public agencies like the one that Spain wants to set up to systematically and independently assess the impact of AI systems and algorithms on fundamental rights and regulations. So that's our perspective.
Okay, those are very good points. And well, I don't really think that many panelists will disagree with that, although I see you laughing, Karina. So perhaps you want to react to that?
No, I totally agree that it's not enough. It's going to be a challenge once you bring it to enforcement at the national level. I'm just not sure, thinking of the AI Act, that goes far enough in terms of regulation. And I understand that, you know, you're also passing parts of the liability to companies. But let's go back to the public sector. Are we passing the same liability to the public sector? And are we taking into account the cases that we already know? So what we've done is kind of a reversing exercise where you look at what the regulation is proposing and the cases that you know, and then you question, is this regulation enough to avoid the cases that you already know that they've gone wrong? So, for example, and I was giving an example of human in the loop, no? Where you have the social worker at the end that can take their own decision. But data show us that what happens most cases is just the social worker confirms the decision of the machine. You know, the average is like over 98% in the cases of these systems in the public sector are not challenged. In this, you know, the final answer is not challenged. But also, and I invite those of you that understand Spanish to check our podcast where we launch a series of episodes. Each episode talks about a different case of ADMS, automated decision-making systems, being used in the public sector in Spain. And what is interesting is we try to unpack to understand what are the stakeholders involved and what happens. And it helps us to understand how challenging the context is. and why it's so challenging to regulate it. And I'm going to give you a very specific example of a system called Verdegem. Was an algorithm designed to measure the risk that women were under when they went to the police station to pose a complaint because of gender violence. So initially when this software was designed, and this is considered a really good software, so I'm not criticizing the system, it's very good. But when the software was designed, it didn't include the variable of if these women had children. So for the first few years, there was not higher risk for women with children. Now, if you had spoken with the social workers, you'll know that women with children under a situation of family gender violence will be harder for them to leave the house because they have so much more at stake. You know, it's like, where are you going to sleep? How are you going to feed your children? How are you going to take to the school? Because probably the person that you're trying to run away from will know that you'll have to take your children to school. So the risk is so much higher. But when this system was designed in the beginning, that variable was not included. It's not because who designed it didn't have good intentions in mind. It's because the system, we didn't put in place a system that kind of goes back and analyze if the software, the algorithm is doing what the objective that it was set to do, if that objective is being achieved. It's because we're not opening these black boxes to external auditing and researchers to really understand what's happening there. So, and coming to the present, where now the variable of children is included, we have, there are two challenges now with the system. Now is that actually the women that are, what happens now is that women with children automatically go to a higher risk. This means that once, this influences everything, how they're going to be treated by social workers, by the court and so on. But if you don't have children, automatically decreases the risk, even if you are in a very high risk situation. So now, most likely what's happening is that the children variable has given too much weight to the system. But the other challenge we have found, and this point also goes back to the social worker that Laia mentioned, is in most cases, the police workers that are using the software, they are not aware that this is an automated decision-making system. And secondly, most women leave the police stations without knowing which risk they were assigned. And this is going to influence what type of support they're going to get from the state in all sorts of services. And they were not even, and they leave the police station without knowing that they were just under, they had the automated decision-making system being used on them. So, and this should not happen. Under the GDPR, this should not happen, but it still happens, and it happens in the public sector. It happens under all good willing, of designing good systems. What I'm trying to say is the AI that we are designing is not going to avoid these challenges unless, as Laia was also mentioning, you bring oversight at national and also local level.
I think that's a very good point and also a very nice anecdote into how systems are being used, how it's already illegal also in the public sector. I think this raises a major point, and also we have to close soon because we don't have so much time left, but I also want to ask you to kind of take this into account for any final statements that you have. You mentioned that a lot of systems are illegal right now. No, but it's true, right? In fact, it's blatantly illegal. We try to regulate this. We come up with plans to regulate. We put in place principles. We say, it has to be explainable. The AI has to respect personal data. But we don't directly shape that design. So a lot of public institutions, they actually have no clue what systems they use. They don't have the expertise. They don't have the capacity. They don't sometimes even have the legal capacity to understand what goes on in those systems because that's trade secrets. So they can't even understand the system that they deploy on their own citizens. So I wonder a little bit, is this then the limit of regulation? Because also in the AI Act, a lot of the standards will be set privately. So what does it mean that the human has to be in control? What does it mean that data has to be representative? It will not be the parliamentarians who decide that. This will be businesses deciding that, often on in global fora that also Pieter already referred to at IEEE, et cetera, at EU level, ETSI, etc. So I wonder a little bit, I know this is a big question, but should then, and this is also an opening to the second panel, should we then look at like, I don't know, more direct public ways of like shaping the technology, investing in the technology? Just a final statement, what do you think is the limits of technology or the technology regulation? That's the final question, and also the final statements. Please keep it to 1 minute. I know it's not fair, but that's life. Please, I would like to give the floor first to you, Carina. Then I give it to you, Helena, and then Laia, I would like you to close. So the final statement is for you.
Look, and being very short and going back to the cases I was telling you about, I think, and I'm not sure that's even the solution, but I think the first thing we need to start with is to raise social awareness what these systems are. So people first understand that they are out there, they are being used daily on their daily lives, that is not something abstract that is somewhere beyond you, that it really has a tangible impact. That's the first one. And then you also have to bring a lot of more technical knowledge inside institutions. You know, it's not enough to say that this technical knowledge belongs to the private sector, because it's been the public sector responsibility that that knowledge went away, because public sector in the past designed these technologies in-house. So let's bring part of this knowledge, this know-how, back to the public institutions. Let's face what is the cost that is going to have for us as a society. My personal opinion, and it's my personal opinion, is that if we don't really do anything about this, if you don't bring the know-how internally back to the public institutions, you run the risk of really building a very dystopic reality, starting with the public sector in Europe, because we already have so many cases, and the Dutch one, it's a clear one, and I know it's always used, and I feel sorry about that, but actually we have dozens of these systems in the public sector in Europe, and we're always putting the spotlight on the private sector. Look, let's lead by example, let's bring much better practices to the public sector. So then you have the power to also say, see, we've done the effort, we achieved it, let's now implement it in the private sector too.
All right, thank you. That's a very concrete 3 points. Public awareness raising around this, like social awareness, and the fact that we need to bring tech knowledge and skills, capacity back to the public sector. They have to give the example. And that will indeed be a big change, because right now that's not the case. Perhaps speaking with the exception of Barcelona, Laia. But first, Helena, what are your views on this, your final statement, and then we go to Laia.
I think I'm going to talk about the exceptionalism of AI, right? There is this impression that this is some kind of completely something else, we've never seen it before. But I think a lot of the areas where the state is regulating are complex, you know, medical, product safety, nuclear. When I was doing taxation, we were told, who is DG Comp to have any understanding of the complexity of a tax bill? So I think I would not be intimidated. I think, yes, resources. So I think when I said liability or transparency, I meant as flanking measures. Because when other people are checking while the public authorities are checking, it also creates a right kind of circle of, you know, supervision of how well we are doing our job. But I think it's definitely feasible. It does require resources, and we should not think that if we can regulate pharmaceuticals, I mean, again, this is not, I don't think this is such a, yes, it has a pervasive implication in the lives of people, but it can be regulated in the same way, I would say.
All right, thank you. That's also a very clear final statement. And for the final statement, Laia Bonnet, please.
So let me say that the European Union has established itself as an actor which acts to spread norms through the legislative power and its coercive capacity through financial sanctions. That is a normative power with the ability to shape the conceptions of what is normal. And given its legal framework and the size of its internal market, the EU still has a regulatory capacity with effects that reach far beyond its borders. Its internal regulation is imposed in some cases extraterritorially, influencing what other countries or technological giants do. This is our main weapon to protect our market and our regulations, but also our values. So as we did in the past with the rules that govern international trade, now we must influence the rules that govern artificial intelligence. We could say that today there are 3 technological visions battling in the world: those of China, the United States, and the European Union. We know for sure that the confrontation between them will shape the notions of freedom, privacy, and democracy in the future. Between large corporation and state power, as in China, between deregulation and tight control, as in the United States, there is a third space that we must promote, a third digital way. And only Europe is strong enough to regulate based on values, as it has been made clear with the General Data Protection Regulation. But for this, Europe has a pending subject, the appetite for power. Europe must want to exercise power to preserve its political and social model. What is at stake is who is going to control information systems and the massive use of data. And the European Union must develop the tools that allow us to control the digitalization and automation process. We know the difficulties, but we only have the law, the European law, to make our approach and our values prevail. We have to work with it and believe in it because it is the main tool we have. Europe has a choice to make. Either we go for a human digital transition or for a model based on techno-solutionism. I think what we social democrats have made our choice to already, thanks among others to the work Brando is doing in the European Parliament. But please, finally, do trust cities. We know what is happening on the ground and in other places. We will experience the effects of badly designed and used AI before it reaches the Commission or the Parliament. And we will continue to innovate through sandboxes and urban labs. So we will be on the front lines of the European AI model, and we honestly can improve it by being at the tables where decisions are made.
All right, thank you very much, Laia. That was a very powerful closing remark. So in essence, what you said is that Europe should not be afraid to exercise powers over these systems. These systems are already there. They're widespread in the public sector, in the private sector, but they affect our lives, they affect the economy, our democracy, society. So it's really time to set some rules in place and also make the shift to make sure that those rules will work. And there, of course, I know that municipalities are very important as well, because that's where it happens. It's the ground level. It's like the smart city debate. It's all those public systems around mobility, around allocating scarce social goods that will decide really the fate of a lot of people, a lot of citizens that should be protected in this. I would like to close on that kind of a call to action, which I think is good. And also to tell you that what is now being discussed, what we have discussed, like the importance of regulation, but also some of the limits and the work that has to be done at the public sector will be also taken up in the second panel. The second panel will look at decentralization of AI, it will look at the role of public investment, and to see if indeed this other approach is possible. Before we do that, we close for a coffee break. Here in the room, for the people, there's coffee outside. For the people virtually, I'm afraid you have to make your own coffee. But take a moment, take a break, and we'll be back in 15 minutes at 11:50 sharp for the second panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the coffee break. And we're back for the second panel. Is another approach possible? Decentralization of AI and public investment in AI. Now, this morning we listened to a great set of speakers and we discussed the limits and the possibilities of regulation to kind of guide artificial intelligence into a beneficial direction. But we also saw a little bit the limits of regulation. It cannot solve all. We also need to look beyond regulation. Because of course, and this is also something, Pieter, that you already explained this morning, there's a big centralization of power when we discuss AI. There's a few global firms that develop what we call foundational models, like big AI models that other countries and other firms have to rely on for the development of AI. This is, for instance, Microsoft, which partnered with OpenAI. This is Google, that, for instance, also bought the European company DeepMind. So there's a centralization ongoing. And it's also questionable, I think, the direction they're taking the development of artificial intelligence in. And so the question in this panel becomes, can we do something different? Can the European Union, but also other like-minded countries, come up with like perhaps more decentralized models? Is that possible? Is that realizable? Is it envisageable? And how then to do that? Like, what's the role of public authorities in this? What's the role of, for instance, smaller businesses in this? Should we develop like local ecosystems? Should we look at industrial policy to make this happen? So these are big questions, but again, you don't have to listen to me to tackle those, because we have a great set of experts with us today. First, we have with us Montse Güell. She's the head, the CEO and founder of Big Onion Tech. She's also a professor of commercial law at University in Madrid. I have to look at my notes here, but it's the Carlos III University in Madrid. We also have with us Jesús Herrero Poza. He's the head of cabinet of the State Secretary in Spain for Digitalisation and AI. That's of course an extremely relevant portfolio as well for what we're going to discuss today. And also in that capacity, of course, he's very much involved with public sector policies around digitalization, around AI. So we definitely will listen to him on the public approach as well to this. And last but not least, we have a familiar face as well in the panel, Pieter Verdegem, who also delivered the keynote this morning. Pieter, of course, just to recap, in case you forgot, he's a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster, editor of the book on AI for Everyone, and an expert also on media theory, which is also relevant, of course, for the discussion today. Now, before we go into the discussion, I want to make two quick remarks. First is, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in the audience, and we can take them directly. Second, for the people online, you can always make a comment in the chat, on the Zoom, but also, for instance, in the YouTube comment section, and then we will also relay those during the panel discussion to the relevant speakers. Now, before we go to our panelists to discuss the first questions, I also would like to introduce a video from European parliamentarian Iban Garcia del Blanco. He's the, well, let's say the coordinator for the Socialist Democrats in the European Parliament on the Special Committee on AI in a Digital Age, which is a very relevant portfolio. And he would like to address us via video and share a little bit what the stakes are and what he thinks is important when we talk about the development of AI into a socially beneficial direction. So please stay with us for a video from Iban Garcia del Blanco. Let's now show the video statement.
Gracias a la Fundación Campalans.
I would like to thank the Campalans Foundation, the Public License Foundation and FEPS for organizing this very timely event. I would have loved to be here with you today to hear this panel, to hear the experts here with you, but I couldn't make it. I still thank you for the opportunity to share with you some reflections about the phenomenon and the implications of AI. The European Union aspires to become a modern economy which is fair, sustainable and efficient in the use of resources and competitive in the global scenario. This is why I talk about the cross-sectional transformation of all sectors and adaptation to the digital environment. They've focused on this for the coming years, and most of our interactions are already now in chat, social media, and messaging apps, and these added to the measures to control the spread of COVID-19 has led to the generalization and intensification of the use of digital technologies in all fields: work, care, banking, shopping, learning, etc. But also fake news, hate speech. In our world is digital at the moment, for better or worse. This is why it's so important for the European Union, on the one hand, to promote the potential of these technologies for the well-being and competitiveness of Europe, and on the other hand, to control the inherent risks or to prevent their consequences. Both in the public and private sectors, we should use AI with the aim of benefiting the people and our societies, promoting an inclusive use and implementation of the technology. If we take as an example the field of sustainability, AI should contribute to reaching the sustainable development goals, the preservation of the environment, and the climate neutrality and circular economy goals. But at the same time, the massive implementation of AI in all devices that we interact with should not multiply or broaden the existing gaps due to lack of knowledge or lack of access to the technology. This is why the digital literacy is such an important process to ensure their independence and the rights. The regulatory framework for AI and data should push us towards those goals. The proposal of an AI law has as a goal providing AI with a thorough regulatory framework based on fundamental rights and our democratic values that allows for innovation at the same time as protecting us from the inherent risks. The review process of the Commission proposal is now taking place in Parliament. Our amendments, the amendments of the Social Democrats, are mainly focused on guaranteeing the development of these technologies based on principles that respect fundamental rights. Secondly, integrating standardization of social benefits in codes of conduct or standards. Third, to clarify the responsibility between and redress damages caused, and also the obligation to ensuring digital literacy, and finally proposing a governance model that goes beyond the coordination between member states and a European agency. To conclude, from the European Parliament, we are achieving significant advances vis-à-vis establishing a solid foundation for digital transition to come to a good end. But we're also aware of the fact that any development in AI must guarantee that these technologies work for people, that they are a force for good, and that they are committed to improving the lives of citizens throughout the life cycle of the system and the AI systems. Legislators, public authorities, the different sectors, citizens, and society at large. We should all focus our efforts in guaranteeing that AI, developed and marketed in the EU, promotes talent and improves the different abilities necessary to promote a prosperous AI system which contributes to the development of our societies and to combat phenomena that damage them. And the EU should follow its path towards European AI focused on human beings, sustainable, safe, inclusive, and reliable. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, you just saw the video from Iban Garcia del Blanco. He specifically underlined, among many points, he underlined the importance of like making sure that AI is to the benefit of society and citizens. And he mentioned, of course, that AI has to be human-centered. And of course, we know already from this morning how Pieter thinks about how this is going at the moment. So I would not address this question to Pieter, but I would like to quickly take a temperature from you, Montse, and also from you, Jesús. Like when you look at the field of AI right now, Do you think we're going in the direction of something that's useful to society? Do you look at developments positively? This could be a very quick answer just to kind of take a little bit of temperature. So how do you look at these developments? And then afterwards we continue to see how we can do that in terms of policies. Perhaps Montse, you would like to take this question first, and afterwards a quick comment as well from Jesús.
Much to be here. The first thing, and I think your question is very pertinent. Yes, I believe we have been progressing a lot. So there is a lot of development from different fields in different universities. There is a lot of research globally, but I think in Europe more. And there is very small and medium company, tech, specifically tech, doing things in AI. So yes, I think we are moving forward and in a very fast way. We need to know how we do it. But yes, I think positively.
Okay, that's good, also for the diversity of opinions during this event. Perhaps, Jesús, a quick comment for you on this as well?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the event and for inviting me. And my first comment, well, I would have liked for them to be a bit longer because I think we should assess the importance of the challenge ahead of us. But, well, continuing along what Montserrat said, I think there's an element which is structural, which is key, which makes us approach AI differently. The big tech giants, Asian American, have done so with their own muscle, and we do not have the capacity to compete if we do not pull together data sources, companies, businesses, innovation, if we do not pull together our learnings and we make learning something of all. And this means that the starting point for Europe and European companies for the development of AI should be different. And therefore, this is also an opportunity to show that there are other models of development and acceptance and integration that are different. But yes, I think the approach, and this event is a proof of that, is moving along the right path.
So you do argue for a different model, which is necessary in view of the big power concentration that we have seen and also discussed already this morning, and of course during the keynote. I would think that now, because of course the time is limited, we can skip the rest of the discussion on the problems, but go straight to what that means in terms of what we should do. So what are the policies? For instance, Pieter, this morning you mentioned that you indeed plead for a radical democratization of AI. It should be beneficial to all, it should represent all, it should also kind of be shaped by all. What should we do? How do we manage to do that? Exactly in view of this big power concentration. So how do we get there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, one thing as a start, I would say we need to think, or we need to realize AI is what is called the general purpose technology. So, and that's a term that economists use to describe a technology that is not impacting as a technology itself, but also, you know, other technologies, societal structures. There's a reason. So other examples of a GPT are electricity, and there's a reason why, you know, the impact is so important that we cannot just leave it to the market by itself. One of the characteristics of a GPT is that it's often leading to winners and losers. And the winners, what the picture I'm seeing right now is that, and just still going on the problems, is the winners are big tech, who are, especially since the pandemic, have really increased their value and their profits and so on and so forth. I think as starting to talk about solutions and how can we deal with this, I would say it's a combination, and making also the bridge from the first panel, from regulation, but in addition to that also resisting and recoding or reinventing, so coming up with alternatives, because I don't know, like, I'm not an optimist, but we live in a systemic crisis. We have climate change, we have pandemics, we have growing inequality, and we really need to come up with alternatives. That does not mean that I'm making a plea here for a revolution, but we need to nurture a system of alternatives that reimagines possibilities. And particularly, I mean, we're here in Barcelona, there's a lot of projects already happening. We've heard that in the first panel as well about co-polis and local initiatives. And one of the benefits of that is participatory, because it's at a local level that people will really want to, you know, have a say in what systems are developed. And I think in addition to keep on regulating the big system, we also need to reimagine alternatives particularly at the local level, and nurturing an ecosystem, and that's where the role of national governments but also local governments can step in. And I think some of my colleagues here will talk more about this as well.
Thank you, Pieter. You mentioned local ecosystems, decentralization in a way. Perhaps Montse, I know you have a lot of experience in exactly this, like building local ecosystems. So I wonder a little bit from your perspective, how do we do this? Is it already happening? But also one point, I mean, I know you also have like a lot of experience in linking multinationals to local firms, like startups, etc. So do you agree with Pieter on this argument that it should be all like local, decentralized? But again, is that possible? Because like a lot of AI models, they kind of right now rely on huge scale, huge data sets, huge computing power. We talk really about billions. If you look at the annual investment of Microsoft, etc. Also for skills, right? Talent is very expensive, it's scarce. So what's your take on that? Like, do you think this is a viable alternative?
I completely think on it, and as I work on it, and I completely agree with you, Pieter. In fact, this is the power of the people. So what we need to know in this 21st century is that we people, we are experts on different fields, and we have view of different fields. So what we found with the tech community and all these skilled, talented people is that they want to work for their values. And we are living in a world where we know there is 17 sustainable development goals, very clear on the mind of all of us for 2030, 8 years. So a lot of young people, and not so young people, but young on spirit people, are looking in the tech environment to do something in favor with their skills of programming, of architecting, of making possible networking, all that giving for a purpose, giving for the purpose of benefiting the planet, benefiting all of us. So yes, there is a lot of communities, of tech communities, that they think better on how to work together for that purpose, and they are a little bit far away of if they want to work or not in a multinational. They are preferring to work in small, medium companies and connect with other communities to do that. So that's one of the benefits of I think, the tech community.
That's a very interesting answer. So you mentioned that in a way young people, they want to work for like a different alternative. They don't necessarily go for big tech, but they also want to work in like local ecosystems, smaller companies. But one quick question on that, because this of course addresses one aspect of the problem, skills, but not necessarily like investment in infrastructure. When we talk about data sets, when we talk about computing power, do you see there problems? Like when we talk about local businesses, like do they have access to that? Is that like, let's say, limiting the possibilities? And after that, I would like to go to you, Jesús, to comment a little bit on this from the public perspective. So what is Spain, what's the government doing on this?
I think, like these last days, we had one of the biggest good news here in Barcelona, no? That this investment, no? Or this idea that we use the supercomputing field that we have here in Barcelona, also to start to work on developing new semiconductors hardware. So this is all about machine at the end. So what is the electronics, the photonics, what we use there? If we know that, later on the power of computing is going to be less and less, let's say, expensive and more useful for everybody. So that it's more about the hardware than the software in this case. And when we think about AI, it's software sometimes, but this software is only possible to be run, as you said, if there is large infrastructure, and who owns these infrastructures has a lot to say. So this is why I think in Europe we need to focus on in the little and local communities to have more and more hardware that should be cheaper and more available for everyone. So this is why this is the next step, no? How we design this new hardware. We talk a lot about electronics, but it's true that we are in the photonics age and we have some quantum research.
For our audience, because I'm not sure everybody understands, could you maybe explain the difference between electronics and photonics?
Yes, we are coming back to Bohr, to the atom. No, this is like really scientific approach, but the truth is that how we do programming, how we do software is related to the capability to work in materials that they are doing connectivity. No, this is like electricity. We have electricity because we are capable to somehow excite, these little particles. So think in a very, very small element that you have for any material, and the way how we do connectivity over there is what we have been investigating. So nowadays, it's more small that we know as an electron. We know working in a very, very small particles that are called photons. That is the capability to have the light transmission. So it's very scientific. We don't need to go to this detail, but we need to know it because this is about infrastructure of that. If we don't have these infrastructures, we cannot do programming and we cannot do AI.
Thank you very much. I should probably have warned the audience that Montse is an engineer by training, so she can go very technical very quickly. But let's move on to Jesús. Jesús, you heard a little bit like some of the challenges, right? Like when we talk about, well, again, like the centralization of AI, you mentioned the different approach is important. It's also possible. We also heard that for Montse, that there are small businesses, that they are building kind of like connecting into ecosystems. There are other people that are willing to work for those smaller firms, even if that maybe means taking a pay cut. But what is the Spanish government doing to support this? What kind of public policies do you think are important, and what's already happening from the Spanish government? Because I know there's quite a lot happening, but perhaps you can like enlighten the audience a little bit on this point.
Well, first of all, I like to dimension the challenge we have. We have seen the dogma, the logic, the language, and the way of thinking of the model that directs our societies, which is capitalism, that with the new technologies is transforming into a different model we still don't know. But we lost the vocabulary, we lost the capacity to generate ideas and to have different approaches. From the universities, we need to incorporate the human aspect of this technological impact. We're here, we need to regulate because the market hasn't done the job. The products they put in the market has a damaging impact on relationships and on human rights, and we must correct those. That's why we need the public administration and the states. In this far west situation, not everything is acceptable, and this is very important. We cannot lose the opportunity or miss the opportunity to generate new thoughts. We're looking at the different models. The market at the moment decides the efficiency of technological processes. I was talking to a colleague here about this technological development going because of product effectiveness, improving service, etc. Now we have to design this for the citizens in a civic dimension. I think this is important to know the role that we can play and set a new set of rules of how things are being done at the moment. We have a change in the scale of values and in the world, in how to choose your reference points, on how we relate to each other, on our community using to be just as far as our eyes could see, and now is as far as our keyboard can get to, and to having that impact on others. And it's a responsibility that we all have. So I was talking about artificial intelligence being all of us. Every time I train an algorithm, where can you see a cat? Click on this box. Everyone can say in our CV that we all work for Google. We've all been training their algorithms. So artificial intelligence is all of us already. But when we look at it from an approach where it was improving services and products for certain corporate people, now we need to turn this into something that improves our citizen life. It's an opportunity that we have, and we need to reach this point. A year after being in the Secretary of State, I fell in love with something of the work that I was doing, because one of the first steps was to develop a chart of digital rights. When we look at the government as being a builder of rights, and this is important, we cannot have the market rules and this race for innovation blind us from what's really important. What's really important is looking for happiness, for having a more solid society, for societies that look after each other. And I think Spain has a lot to say on this. One of the things we're doing in the government is 1,000 million to develop AI in Spain, because when we look at the world from our point of view, everything is different. We're a society, Marie-Louise is here, who strengthens the pension system, the dependency laws, education from 0 to 3 years of age. We're a society that is cohesive because we care for each other. And the technological variable can have an impact on this. That's why it's important for us to develop AI, not from linguistic codes about English language or Chinese language, but from the loving codes of the Spanish language. I think this is important. The Chart of Rights inspired the digital rights from the EU, which was born from our own inspiration. In December, we have a conference from the OECD, which we're going to have in Spain, because this approach of values and rights for all countries is very important. So what we're saying is we all want to progress, but we want to progress along the right direction. We want to go towards defending the citizenship and not allow bullying finishing at 2 p.m. when kids left school to continue into the night because they can bully people through social media, for example. Because we have this model that we had already overcome, saying that the stronger rules, that whoever screams the loudest is the one who's heard. That used to be the rules and how things work, but we need to make sure that this isn't the case. So this is a very important, having an ethical approach that allows us to approach this digitalization process for the country.
Thank you very much, Jesús, for that very comprehensive remark. I also listened to something interesting that you said.
The microphone.
Okay. I am somehow used to having like a Madonna microphone where I don't have to hold the microphone in my hands. But let's continue. Jesús, you of course shared remarks like on the different aspects of Spanish government policy when we talk about a different approach. You mentioned why this is important. You mentioned the rules that also came back in the first panel. But you also mentioned that, if I understood it correctly, there's 1,000 million, so 1 billion, being invested directly by the Spanish government into the development of AI. Could you share a little bit about that? Like, is this like directly public investment, or is this again going to big tech, or like what are the goals of this policy?
This is one of the new initiatives. I've just been called by the General Director to tell me that we have 210 beneficiaries, that we will be investing 140 million for integration and development of AI into the value chain. It might look like it's something very advanced, but we've seen some projects like including AI in a company that exports hams. So we can see AI transforming all kinds of markets, and we need this in this country. We also have 50 million euros for funding future missions for the future like climate change, future of the workplace, and healthcare, and they're already there. As an anecdote, the leader of the Popular Party in Almeria, he was talking about a company that he said the funding wasn't arriving. And he was talking about a company that had €1,300,000 funding for AI. So the money is arriving, and they're having an impact on companies that have the knowledge and the expertise to be able to make these projects work. So we're talking about AI in Spanish. This is something that the Spanish government has been working, their natural language plans, to develop a corpus, a linguistic corpus in Spanish, to be able to develop algorithmic models to generate AI in Spanish. Here in Barcelona, we have a project within the PSN, the Supercomputer Center in Barcelona, and it's one of the people doing this project, but Google, Microsoft, small companies as well who are developing natural language and AI and algorithmic intelligence in Spanish, and they need this drive. And during the pandemic, they're still recovering at the moment, but they have the administration, the public administration has a great impact on this. So when we look at this model of a country where the state can impact on people's society, if we didn't have this, it would be a disaster. It would be a disaster because apart from the personal element of losing so many people during the pandemic and the recovery that is being promoted by the public sector, the mid to long-term challenges should be promoted and driven by the public sector. No private sector can do that. We have 1,000 million, 140 in the first in the first stage to make sure that we have this role. Spain, but the rest of the European Union, without them, it would be impossible to think that. No actor will put this kind of money to transform society from the top to the bottom, from the incorporation of AI values into companies, creating funds of 2,000 million euros, and also the same from the private sector to invest in these projects. Because, like Montse was saying, this is already here. The competitor is not next door. The competitor is somewhere else, somewhere we don't know. And collaboration is the logic that will make the difference, because we're collaborating with people who've been here longer, 15 years, in generating data models and in collecting data. We have to do things differently. We've identified that in difficult moments, collaboration is the only tool that we have, because those who compete are the ones who always win. They're the ones who don't understand how our model works. And this is an important aspect. Technology needs to strengthen the basic pillars that allow us to understand each other as citizens. Otherwise, in the end, we'll just become more of a slave.
I mean, you shared a lot here, again, which I'm trying to summarize. But I understand that there's a lot of concrete investments already taking place. So when you talk about that billion or like that 1,000 million that's being invested, that's already going into a lot of local projects. You also shared, like underlined the importance of this. I'm wondering a little bit, because you also said that it's important that the public sector does that, because they can like invest money in technologies that the private sector wouldn't do. Now, this is a bit, perhaps a little bit of a technical question, but I also would like to understand from Montse and also from Pieter, what is that different technology? Because right now, also like when you talk about AI, we mainly talk about what's now popular recently is, well, recently like 20 years, is machine learning, deep learning, right? So this is the development essentially of statistical tools based on huge data sets to predict patterns, which is extremely useful in the consumer internet to surveil people, to sell people ads, etc., etc. I'm being a little bit negative, there's also positive uses, but it's a specific model of the development of AI that also benefits large firms, because they have these data troves, they have these huge data sets, they also have this huge computing power, so it's also like a good, very convenient way for them to cut out the competition. And of course there are differences when you talk about AI technologies, right? Like different ways of doing it. You have symbolic AI, I don't get into the details here, but it's not based per se on huge data troves. So is this also something you think is important, that we should look at like different ways of doing AI, and like do you have some ideas on that, like on alternatives? Perhaps Pieter, you first, and then Montse, if you have a reaction to that.
Yes. So I mean, I recently wrote a paper and I was analyzing the problem there of the commodification of data. So all our data, medical data, whatever data we post on social media is scooped up by big tech, you know, and I'm not saying we should be compensated for that, but that data is from us, and we should be at least also be, you know, given a say about what data is shared by whom, for what purposes, and so on and so forth. The other aspect is data extraction. You know, value is being created out of that data. In the UK, for example, you mentioned DeepMind. There is the famous case of DeepMind, who is a subsidiary of Google, using with the NHS public medical system, underfunded, and DeepMind comes in, trains on that public data algorithms, and for now, NHS can use those systems for free. But what in the future they say, well, now, you know, we'll charge you whenever you're using the system. But it's public data, especially medical data, and it's been used as an example of how these negotiations between public and private should not happen, because the information commissioner in the UK was saying this is clearly a breach of data protection. I think also in terms of computing power, that is something that we also need to think, and that's why in that paper I was talking about AI commons. So we know already a lot about data commons in cities like Barcelona and Amsterdam. There have been trials with that, and I think it's really important. But beyond data, there's also how can we, you know, come up with an alternative for that concentration of it's only big tech who has the computing power. So therefore also what the Spanish colleague here was saying, like investing in public computing infrastructure is really important. Plus also the AI talents. I mean, also in the other panel it was mentioned, like within the public sector, we need to be sure that we can hire those people. And nowadays there's this gold rush for AI, and the leading AI scientists will all be working for American companies. There are cases in the US that complete computer science departments have been just taken over for the technical infrastructure, but also for the human resources. And I think that's something that we, national governments, but also international governments, that we need to think of. And you know, it's fantastic to hear about the Spanish initiatives, but also we need to have international cooperation, sharing what approaches we can do in terms of establishing AI commons, or however we want to call it, as an alternative where the public, not only the state, but also the public has a more prominent say in what's happening with data, and also how they can have a say in what service will be developed and to whom's benefit.
Completely right. In fact, you tackle like three things important. No? For me, is the quality of the data. No? So from where is the source of the data? So where is coming this data, and when, and what is the quality? The security of data. So how that has been transferred, how that is being treated, and how that is visualized. And finally, the third one and very important one is data governance. So if we tackle this data, the data life cycle, so from where is coming this data and where is going, that is something that is a new approach of the digital architecture. And this is what we need to think about. We have been talking over the years about big data, and that's interesting. But what is nowadays a trend is the slow data. It's like the real-time data. So I'm getting my data from this source, I'm using it for that purpose, and it disappears. And that's a lot about privacy. No? And this is the new system. So the new digital architecture is more focused on slow data, on I use it with a purpose, and I destroy it. And that helps on privacy and in other topics. And it's for that the new architectures based it on distributed hardware, or distributed or decentralized infrastructure and computing power. It's very, very interesting to take a look at, and not just in research, but also in investment of applications on that.
That's a lot of points raised by both of you. Montse, you mentioned, of course, the importance of data, the importance of new approaches. You also mentioned slow data, which I think is kind of a new concept also for the people in the audience. Pieter, you mentioned also the challenges when we talk about skills, entire teams being bought away by big tech. And I also personally know this at the European level, we've seen this. So it's kind of ironic, or perhaps even sad, that the Libra stablecoin that Facebook tried to develop was developed by a team that actually worked for the EU, and they were hired in one go to work from like public interest initiatives to Facebook, because the salaries, it's very difficult to compete with that. And also then a lot of talent, a lot of knowledge, a lot of investments simply get lost. And I think that's actually like a big question, also to you, Jesús, because how do we prevent that from happening? I mean, this is about skills, but not only about skills, also about takeovers, right? I mean, Pieter, for instance, he mentioned the example of DeepMind, UK company, okay, not anymore part of the EU, but still Europe, let's say. They were very successful, very skilled. Google bought them, and there's no somehow public reaction to that, or public policy to deal with that. This is one big example, but it happens every day, also on a smaller scale. And I think, if I understand correctly, right now there's no real limits to that in terms of public policy. So what I understand is that there can be public funds poured into startups, into cooperation with the private sector, and there's nothing preventing the private sector from essentially saying, okay, this now works, we commercialize it with public funds, and we sell it to Amazon, we sell it to Google, we sell it to Facebook. I know this is a bit of a difficult question, but Jesús, do we have any views on that? Like, would it be good to have some limits to that, or like some kind of guarantees, like some anti-takeover clauses? This is kind of about industrial policy as well. Like how do we prevent that from happening? From public funds being siphoned away to the private sector, and often not the private sector in Europe, but the private sector in the US. I see you looking. I know this is a very big question on EU policy, so I don't expect you to come in with a magic solution, but do you recognize the problem?
Ojalá.
I wish I had a magical solution, but there was a Spanish president who said that the change Spain needed was to change the engine in the car with the car running. And I think this is what happened. We need to change the engine of our society without society stopping. But this is a question that we all have to ask ourselves. When the country is the driver force for improvement, for innovation, that has an impact on the market, that benefit and that progress needs to be reverted back into the country, because large corporations know where to get to. They have agreements with universities, they transfer knowledge paid by all of us, with brains that we have all funded through scholarships, through taxes and public money, and they end up becoming benefits, profits for corporations. This is something that we need to get rid of. I think there's some interesting figures. They're not corporate, they're not competitive, because they haven't had an impact on the market from an absolute point of view of their products. There are some cases where there's spin-offs from universities, from research centers, from technology centers that are promoted by public money, but because of the innovative nature of their product that they're developing, they can actually generate interaction in the market, and the state legitimately can request that that goes back to them so they can redistribute those funds. The states, and obviously we cannot compete with the great tech companies. We have to try to survive, because otherwise we would be fighting on the same playing field, and we cannot do this. We have to take a step forward. We have to generate public companies, spaces that are part of the public administration but can be more dynamic. We need to be able to share knowledge. We cannot have Spanish universities, particularly, and European universities developing innovation, and the people who are behind them, which are the corporate agents, can reach, can identify when the product is mature, and we, as state, need to monitor and track that information. So there has to be a transformation in the talent that we have in public administration. We need to have data engineers, we need to have AI specialists, we need to have human resources managers to identify talent and to improve the services and the professionals that we have in the public administration. Because we have a very competitive space that we need to be entering, and we need to be thoroughly focused on what we're doing and the challenges for the future.
I was a little bit triggered in the positive sense by your remark on we need to have also like public companies, which we have done in the past, right? When you talk, for instance, about Airbus, that was a public corporation, and that kind of catapulted the EU from nothing really after the Second World War into one of the leading, and now the leading position in terms of international aviation. So it can be done, but perhaps we have to relearn it. Before we continue on this, because I still have like a lot of questions to you on these topics, we also have a question that comes from online. Perhaps my colleagues can come to the microphone and read the question from the Zoom.
From the web seminar, Juan Rodriguez is asking what he's asking, well, any of the panelists, any of them who can answer. He says, AI without data is useless. Thus, what we need to regulate is data. And the question is, can we control and regulate data in the administration?
Thank you, Jordi. Who would like to go first? I mean, Montse, you already mentioned the importance of data, that this should be done.
Yes, but I will pass through because this is more the question for regulation and administration. But I will help on that, Jesús, and I will highlight one thing that is also with my answer before. No, It's not about regulation of the data, because the data is something that is like life. It's going to be there for a purpose and it's going to disappear. So this is the new approach. The new approach is not concentrate on data itself, but concentrate on the purpose of this data, when it was collected, how it's transmitted, how it's treated, and how it's presented. So we need to think more on the, let's say, on the garden than on the little flower. No? So the data is interesting, but what is interesting is what we do with data. So how we convert data in information, how that is converted to knowledge, and how that is converted to wisdom. And that, I think, from a public administration point of view, is about how you regulate this transfer of data to information, knowledge, and wisdom. And that should be ethical, of course.
Sí. Totalmente, yo creo.
I completely agree. There's two elements, which is soft power, creating dynamics, and the other one is the regulatory element. In both fields, the administration needs to play a role. And in terms of data regulation and privacy, I think the Spanish privacy data law is very significant. It has been a landmark, really, for the protection of private data. And indirectly, it's led to great operators having to comply with this law as a standard. So that mixture between soft power and hard power is very important to be understood. And the second question, Montse was saying that we need to regulate how we transfer data, which operators and which guarantees they need to have to transfer that data, where is the data, which is very important as well. So Google, Microsoft, no data from a minor will be outside of the European Union boundaries, frontiers. So all these servers and data, we need to know where it is placed so we can compete with these regulations. When we talk to operators, they understand this. They tell you about the difficulties that they have within their structural logics. They need to look at these questions. But we all understand that Europe should be sovereign in terms of their data. The data that we collect and that we use should be within our frontiers. And this is important. It shouldn't be just unidirectional, because when the regulation is just unidirectional, you miss things. It needs to be looked at from a broad perspective, working with the operators, looking at the different phases, and to standardize uses that will not be allowed, that will be banned.
Comprehensive answers to approaches. I think you both agree on the importance of like the data life cycle. So the fact that we just have to make sure it is collected for the right purpose, and then, you know, like the knowledge and innovation that we want will flow from that. I do have one quick question to Pieter. Do you agree with that? Because to me this sounds absolutely crucial, but I also wonder a little bit, and I take a little bit of devil's advocate position here, like we can make sure that data is collected in line with data privacy principles, right? And that, you know, that's not stored illegally, etc. But still, for public innovation, we probably need access as well to data, and that seems still a problem. Like what I got from the question online. Pieter, do you have any comments on that? Like and here I want to plug one thing, because we're now right now we're in Barcelona, and I've also spoken to Francesca Bria, who was the chief digital officer, the chief technology officer at the municipality of Barcelona, and she suggested that indeed the access to data is also fundamental, and that perhaps public authorities should also kind of, via, for instance, public procurement, make sure that all the services in the municipality that generate data, that they flow back, that data flows back to the municipality so they can gather that data and they can also build new public services on that and perhaps aggregate that, of course, in line with the GDPR, to build different systems that they also control and that they can also then kind of shape in a direction that will help citizens. So this kind of access aspect, I can imagine it's also important. Pieter, please. And if you have any reactions from the panelists on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking about the example of Barcelona, and so the Decode project was a European Union funded project which had trials in Barcelona and Amsterdam as well. And I don't know the details, but I know that the local government in Barcelona managed to force Telefónica, I think, that they would share some of the data being collected and being reused for that in that approach of data commons. So I think that's really important. It's also this idea of where does innovation sit, and often there's this discourse that innovation only happens in the private sector, and that's a fallacy. You know, if you look at a lot of the iPhone, Google search engine, they have all been developed by public funding. So part of that is we need international cooperation of sharing these initiatives and successes of how local organizations and local governments making breakthroughs in terms of dealing with data, also skills and computing systems and so on and so forth. I mean, we have the OECD. Why can't we have something that works at the level of digital service innovation, or whatever, how you want to call it, where some of these trials that have been successful in one place, and that's part of, I don't know, I'm not a technical expert whether decentral AI is possible, but I think we can think about alternatives that follow a different approach, that live next to big tech, and we can nurture them and support them from the public sector. And most importantly, we need to exchange knowledge and experience of these small wins. And there is, for example, the platform cooperativism movement that, in Mondragon in Spain is a big example. It's successful. In New York, Trevor Scholz has been supporting this platform co-op movement. And that is, there are examples of organizations where the employees have a bigger say in terms of what direction is going. So I think in terms of platform cooperativism, we need to see what we can reuse as that model for AI commons as well. I think that would be good.
Can I push back a little bit on one of the things you said? I mean, you mentioned the platform corporatism movement. For people who don't know, that's like in a way like a governance model where people like join together in organizations and everybody has a stake in the outcome, a say in a way in the management. So it's a very bottom-up approach to work together, to do innovation, etc., etc. I think this is very fruitful. It's also a little bit like something that we've been hearing for like, I think 2 decades now. I mean, Trevor Scholz, he's been in this for quite a while. And it's always like, we can come up with this approach at the local level, but somehow it doesn't seem to scale. Like, it didn't really prevent us from being in a situation where we're now, where a lot of resources are still harnessed, at an extremely concentrated level. So I wonder a little bit about the thing you said about the OECD. Because you said, perhaps we should have some public institution, and there are examples of this, right? Like if you look at Germany, if you look at the US, they have this kind of public technology funds that can kind of a little bit do this aggregation work, where they link all those initiatives, they create common standards for data sharing, they create institutions that will allow all these local hubs to connect. And right now, at European level, we don't have that. So is this something that you think could be interesting? Like some kind of European public technology fund or something like that?
Yes, for sure. There is only, and it's not exactly the same, but we are going in the right way. There is the program called ELIS, no? ELIS, I think in English. ELIS. And here in Spain we have ELIS Alicante, no? That is a foundation that is built by civil society, no? I'm a co-founder, for example. And there is a quite interesting thing that is research. So what you said for sure, Pieter, is that to do big things, we need to invest for, no? Innovation is about investing for test. What we are testing is learning capability. We are not, and this is the big challenge in Europe, no? We think that innovation is doing the final solution, when in reality is investing in the field to investigate, no? to research and go to a new project that will be changing over the time. No? This is what the startups world know. And this is something that in Europe is difficult for us. No? I always say when you go to venture capitals, it's like, it's really a venture because we are asking so much information to the startup at the very beginning that they still don't know. They need to do the trip. And this is traveling around innovation and traveling and understanding how AI works, what we could do differently. All that is what we in Europe still we are too shy and too risk control. No? So maybe we need to manage risk, not to control risk. And you know, it's like innovation versus risk management, no? And I think we are prepared to to do the risk management with an ethical perspective is we do the necessary board and we connect ecosystems. So this is more about what Jesús was saying. Let's connect between different countries. Let's emphasize that we have allies, and let's work in creating an investment fund to do that, to spread around the different centers and also make it happen, no? Because this is the challenge. When coming from the university myself, sometimes we have this investment for research, but the final step, that is technological transfer to the society, goes too late, no? So this is, so shorten shorten the time to go to the market. This is what something we need to short, and say market social civility, social everybody, no? And the second thing is investing in a very smart way, no? In different centers.
I think nobody will disagree with that, like that the public sector should perhaps take a little bit more risk. I think that's a known problem, an important problem that we should overcome. And also linking up the different ecosystems, as you said. We get really close to the end of the time we have for the panel. If there's any final questions from the public, please speak now or be silent for the remaining minutes. If so, then I would like to go to the final statements. You all have 1 minute just to say, what do you think in terms of policy is the most important thing? What will make the difference for Europe? So what gets us to this alternative approach? And perhaps one idea, one innovation that you think is very promising. I know, again, that's asking a lot in 1 minute, but the challenge is on you. I'm the moderator. So perhaps we start with Pieter, if you can. Then we go to Montse, and then Jesús, we close with you. All right.
I think my statement would be, yes, there are alternatives possible, and coming back to the idea of the platform co-ops, and I mean, Yevgeny Morozov talked about this as those are small islands in the sea of commodification, but that doesn't mean we have to accept this as a reality. So we need to imagine alternatives and see how governments can support public engagement in this, because that's another element I think is really important, is the approaches, alternative approaches on AI need to be participatory. They're deciding people's lives, and people need to have a say in this. And young generations of people whose lives will be more impacted by these systems, they need to have a say in this. And that is a crucial element of this public alternative approach to me.
Yeah.
It's very clear. Also, please.
Yeah, I will go coming what you said, no, Pieter, is the enthusiasm. No, we need to have young people and not joining mindset people to really believe on it, no, and we need to engage them and to make them stay with a common purpose, with a very clear understanding of the impact of the social good impact, and they are the talented that we need to remain and to keep them, and we need to convince them to stay in Europe, despite the big amounts that are going in different corporations.
That's a powerful statement, and I think that's definitely true, and it's often forgotten that there is a lot of talent in Europe. There's a lot of talent in the European Union. The problem is that it's difficult to maintain them. But indeed, there's a very high degree of PhDs in AI, etc. It's on a par with the US, it's just that a lot of people leave afterwards. That's the problem. So I think this is indeed a key challenge and a key opportunity also to keep talent in Europe working for the public cause to make that attractive again. After that, let's go to Jesús. Jesús, you have the final statement, so please use it well, but I'm sure you will.
I believe that from progressive environment, we always tackle these processes with enthusiasm, with joy. If we don't do that, we're done from the beginning. And we always have to face catastrophic situations, and we need to be responsible in facing those. But this is an enormous opportunity for transformation and for a better society. And as my two colleagues said, from the public sphere, we need to approach this model in any way we can. Cultural change, company or business design, or the fact that people having access to information without having the right surnames or the right amount of money. So from the public sphere, we always need to level the playing field for all. Second element, regulation. We need to legislate thinking of the people, not the markets. We truly need to make the uses of technology efficient for an impact on a better society. And secondly, we need to have a direct impact on the development. And thirdly, we need to have a direct impact on technological development. We shouldn't allow by means of the law, that there are tools that maximize racist biases, sexist biases, class biases, and different biases. We should have our own standards, and we have the capacity to impact public administration. Everyone says we have this capacity, and we must not lose this role. We need to take this opportunity so that ethics and humanistic vision are at the center and are an initiative that involves us all.
What I take away from the three panelists, from all you together, is a strong focus on the public sector. Not just that it doesn't mean just state governed, it also means to allow alternatives to flourish with small businesses, with NGOs, and that will together create kind of like the counter power, the alternative sources of power to develop alternative sources, alternative models of AI. And what I personally also take home is the idea of, for instance, a European public investment fund to also link up all these different ecosystems, link up all these businesses, and link up all these public initiatives as well that are already being undertaken across the European Union. Now, I really would like to thank the panelists. Thank you very much, Montse. Thank you very much, Jesús. Thank you very much, Pieter. Also for the keynote, of course. I would also like to thank the translators. And to the audience, I would like to ask you, stay with us. We go for a 1-minute break, and then we come back for like a summary of the event, and also for the closing remarks of the president of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies and of the Rafael Campelans Foundation. So we'll be back in 1 minute. Thank you for your patience. Welcome back, and thanks for waiting. And I'm really pleased to introduce you to our president for the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, Maria João Rodrigues. She will give us her closing remarks and kind of also do a summary of what we discussed today, which is a lot of ground to cover, but I trust that's in good hands with you, Maria. Please.
Thanks, and this is really a pleasure to be in this closing moment of this conference on the ethics, artificial intelligence in a geopolitical world. I'm so pleased that we could organize this with the coordination of the Campalas Foundation here in Barcelona and also the Public Letters Foundation in Madrid. This is a good example how we collaborate, and also using Barcelona as our meeting point, because Barcelona is a very renowned city across Europe on the digital creativity we need to have to invent a better future by using digital tools. Well, the conference showed very clearly that we are in a special moment, because the artificial intelligence is bringing a new phase to the digital transformation with a lot of positive potential outcomes to improve our life. But there are also important risks. So we need really to be worried about this, and we need to make choices. Artificial intelligence is not a neutral technology. It's a technology which requires our social and political choices. And at world level, yes, we have tough competition between the United States and China, and we need to ask what should be the role of Europe. And this is a very important moment to ask about this, because next year we'll have a summit on the future, framing global governance for global public goods. And digital goods are important ones. So the question is, what should be the European way to shape the digital transformation? And the conference showed clearly that we have taken important steps over the last 2-3 years. We are starting to regulate the big platforms with important European laws. The Digital Markets Act is one example. We are focusing on citizens and protecting fundamental rights of citizens. GDPR was a first step, very important. Now we are preparing a European law on artificial intelligence. But my main point is, what are the next steps for us, Europeans, to shape the digital transformation? And I think we have 3 key words to make a difference, and also to shape somehow global standards for better use of artificial intelligence. For me, the key words are welfare and well-being. This is something very dear to our hearts in Europe. The second one is sustainable development, our objectives for sustainable development. And the third one is, of course, democracy, democratic governance. And I think we should ask, what is the kind of artificial intelligence we should develop to provide better access to welfare and well-being to all our citizens, and what is the kind of artificial intelligence we should develop to ensure our path to sustainable development, including the green transition. And we know that in order to provide this, we need to have strong democratic governance, strong participation from our citizens, from our cities, and also make sure that these will conduct to a new way to use artificial intelligence with better algorithms, using our data in a fair way, in a transparent way. And like that, I really believe that Europe can make the difference regarding the life for Europeans, but also the life across the world. Because I repeat, next year will be a very important year to define global standards for better use artificial intelligence. So we need to have a clear agenda, a clear message, and I think a conference like that is already a good step in this direction. So this is my pleasure now to ask the president of Rafael Campana's Foundation, my dear friend Josep Montilla, to give our last words. And encantada.
Bé, gràcies. Bona tarda.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. First of all, of course, I would like to thank the co-organizing foundations of this event, the FEPS Foundation and their chair, Maria Joa Rodriguez, and the Pablo Iglesias Foundation and my friend Lisa Carcedo for being here, and Maria Luisa Carcedo. I would like to thank everyone who has been here with us on site, face-to-face or remotely, and of course all of the panelists, starting with the keynote speaker, Pieter, and the different persons who have participated in the two panels. And, well, they've been reflecting upon these topics, contributing concepts about the field of AI, which is part of the present already, and it will be still more significant in our lives in the future, in all areas of life. And of course, thinking about the limits, legislation, and the AI model in the end, which we believe our country and our continent should have, that Europe should have, as compared to other models which, well, other countries with other political and economic models. China, for example, our model will and has to be very far from those who aim at using AI to control society. And of course, to produce better goods and services, yes, but mainly to control society in a system which is not democratic. And also with differences vis-a-vis the US model, we of course have in common with them that we are democratic societies, but there individual rights prevail above all. Individual freedoms, misunderstood individual freedoms prevail, and we could say collective rights, which are included in the European model. The European social model combines freedom and social rights, because the market, which is present in both systems, is very efficient in allocating goods and services, but it is not efficient when it comes to guaranteeing rights. And this is where our AI model, use and regulation of AI, should be connected with that precise model. A model which we, of course, need to regulate in all systems. All systems are regulated by the state. The state has a role, always, even the United States. Well, I'm sure we've all read Mazzucato and the Entrepreneurial State, and we know that without the public resources, in this case of the US administration, today some of the big platforms wouldn't have the predominating role they have, almost as a monopoly. And in Europe, we have successful cases of these public-private collaboration in order to develop technology and innovation and to guarantee something essential, which is competitiveness in the global market. And of course, in order to guarantee rights, we need to regulate. We need to regulate, and I'm sure Europe will be good at that in a slow manner, because Europe's decision-making is slow. This is the system we have given ourselves, a co-governance system, but I think this is also, at the same time, a guarantee. And, of course, the fact that these regulations will not perform the risk that some point at. I mean, the fact that regulation is slow, many say it de-incentivizes the market, but we are positive that these two aspects can be combined. And I'll finish with this. I finish by saying that we, of course, need to take on the huge opportunities of the digitalization process and AI, that AI and digitalization can and will provide in all spheres of life: work, health, leisure, education. So in the end, in order to contribute to society being more free, democratic, and happy, in order to improve the welfare state and our model. And of course, a regulation which, as I said, should not limit development and innovation, should not reduce incentives, and should try to combat at the same time discrimination. There are clear examples of discrimination that have come up throughout the morning, examples of other countries and risks that we have here as well if this regulation does not come forward. And in this regard, I am positive that the thoughts and contributions made here today will be useful to all of us and will allow us to make headway towards general goals of European social democracy and our social democratic model. Thank you very much.